Imagine living in a fantasy world where healers are recognized for their incredible abilities, and because of that, they often receive high-ranking positions filled with power. Healers are considered so important that there is even a royal academy dedicated to training the best healers in the country. Among the healers, there are various classes, ranging from the strongest to the weakest. However, our main character is someone who has never formally studied at an academy to learn how to use his healing magic, and therefore he does not possess a license. Even so, this has never stopped him from helping people whenever he could. Then, after some events that you will soon witness, Xenos ends up opening a small clinic in the slums of the kingdom. His goal was to heal anyone who needed his help, and after he finishes curing a man who came to his clinic, the man thanks him and praises him for his perfect healing. The man does not have much to offer Xenos, so he gives everything he has in his pockets. Xenos does not care about this, because even if this man could not pay him, he would still heal him, and he would charge in another way, perhaps through the back door. Soon after the man leaves, little Lily, who is Xenos' assistant, enters and reminds him that he has a home visit scheduled. Xenos says that he is on his way, so Lily says she will prepare dinner for when he returns. A few hours later, Xenos finishes his visit and returns home. But while walking through the street, he notices a girl who is clearly suffering greatly. At that moment, a noble appears and begins shouting at the girl. The noble asks where she has been, and the girl tries to explain that she had a very strong pain in her stomach, so she attempted to go to the hospital, but they refused to treat her because she had no money. The noble looks at her and calls her an idiot, as in his view, the simple stomach pain is not enough reason for her to seek medical attention. Since she is a very cheap slave, it would be better if she died, because the cost of healing her would be higher than simply buying a new slave. Without the slightest compassion, the noble lifts the girl and tells her she must return to work immediately. He takes her to a cemetery and throws her to the ground with such force that she hits her head against a tombstone. The girl feels extreme pain, and the noble does not care at all, because according to him, this is an injury that is easy to heal. However, shortly afterward, she falls and begins rolling on the ground in agony, and suddenly, a very frightening dark energy enters her. The noble does not notice this happening, and simply assumes that the girl is pretending not to work. He shouts at her, ordering her to stand, but she cannot because of the excruciating pain, so the noble begins kicking her across the ground, showing himself to be truly selfish, and he would be an excellent candidate for the Blue Lock project. He grows tired of kicking her, so he says she must hurry and starts searching the cemetery for something of value. He then starts walking away, but at that moment, the girl strikes the noble in the stomach. The noble is stunned, as he has never been injured so severely before. He tries to tell the girl that he is a noble, and she cannot do that. But then she remembers how he had been kicking her, which makes her 70% bloodthirsty, leaving the noble with very little room to negotiate. The noble tries to flee slowly because he is injured, and this pace is the fastest he can manage at the moment. This noble would have definitely died, but luckily for him, Xenos was nearby, so the noble runs toward him, begging for help. He tells Xenos that his slave named Lo is trying to kill him. However, Xenos saw the way the noble treated her on the street, so he is certain that this noble deserves such treatment. The girl catches up to the noble, and he begs Xenos to save him. Xenos looks at the girl and realizes she is clearly possessed, so he asks the noble what he was forcing the girl to do. The noble obviously does not want to admit that he was forcing her to rob graves for him, so he tells Xenos that they were working on something related to agriculture. After that, the noble quickly tries to change the subject, telling Xenos that he is severely injured and needs to go to a hospital immediately. He offers a substantial sum for Xenos to help him get rid of the girl, but Xenos says he does not care about money. At the same time, he has also sworn to save people's lives. So when the girl attacks the noble, Xenos saves him just in time. The girl then throws a pile of stones at Xenos, and he dodges them without much effort, showing that he is truly very skilled. The noble realizes that he is very skilled, so he asks Xenos to kill the girl. But Xenos refuses, as he follows a single rule of never killing anyone. The noble tells him to stop this nonsense, because if Xenos does not kill the girl right now, she will end up taking his life. However, Xenos still refuses, because as a healer, the purpose of his life is to save as many people as possible, and immediately after saying this, he punches a stone that the girl threw at him. Xenos observes the girl's movements, and she is moving very quickly, actually moving faster than a demi-human should be able to move, so he knows that something is wrong. He does not want to hurt the girl, but unfortunately, he needs to defend himself. So when the girl tries to cut him, Xenos activates a shield and at the same time raises it toward the girl. And as soon as she tries to attack him, she ends up being thrown backward toward a nearby building. By coincidence, this also causes a piece of the building to fall right next to the noble. If he had been very fast, he could have saved the noble, but he simply chose not to do so. And now that everything has calmed down, Xenos walks to the girl's body and realizes that her leg is broken from the fall. She is still acting very wildly, so Xenos lets her bite his arm. All this so that he can keep her in the same place. And since he had already realized a long time ago that she was possessed, he puts his hand on her head and begins to heal her so that the spirit leaves her body. His healing is very successful. However, he is still a little curious about what she was doing that allowed an evil spirit to possess her body. Anyway, he still needs to take care of the ghosts, so he uses his powers for that. Then he turns back to the girl, and now that she has returned to normal, he heals her broken leg so she can walk again. And while the noble withdraws from the debris, he sees Xenos healing her. He is surprised by the fact that Xenos is powerful enough to heal instantly, and unfortunately for the noble, he is still very injured, so he begs Xenos to save him. But Xenos says that in reality, he has just finished his shift, so the noble will have to wait until the next day to be healed. The noble knows he will die from his bleeding in a few hours, so he begs Xenos to heal him immediately. Xenos eventually agrees, but says that the noble will have to pay a very high price. The noble does not care about the price since his life is at stake, so he gives Xenos all the money. He has an amount well above the market price for a healing, so he is sure that Xenos will be satisfied. But to his surprise, Xenos says that this is not enough. Normally, he does not care about the amount of payment, but due to the chaos this noble caused, Xenos ended up activating his evil capitalist mode. In response, the noble threatens to report Xenos for extortion, but this does not bother him since he does not even have a license to heal people. Technically, he is an illegal healer, but it is useless for this noble to try to report him, since he was forcing his servant to rob graves. To resolve this matter, Xenos says he is willing to make a deal. He tells the noble that in addition to payment in gold, he wants to take the girl as a slave. The noble never cared about this girl, so he agrees to Xenos' terms. As long as his life is saved, he agrees, saying that once he is healed, he will hand this slave over to him. After everything is resolved, the noble leaves very angry, and then Xenos sits on the ground next to the girl and waits for her to wake up. When she finally regains consciousness, she is surprised to see a man sitting next to her and asks who he is. Xenos says his name and explains that he just bought her, so from now on, she is his slave. At a perfect moment when no one is watching, Xenos asks the girl, named Tio, to immediately take off her clothes. Tio becomes nervous and asks if he is serious, and he says that he is indeed serious. He reveals that he paid a very high price for her, so he needs to make sure his property is in good condition. Tio ends up doing everything he says, since she cannot disobey her master. When she takes off her clothes, Xenos takes a good look at her body and immediately notices something very wrong. He had already noticed that she was feeling pain, and now he perfectly understands the reason. She has a gallstone blocking her, and I do not understand anything about this, but it must be very serious. However, for him, this is easy to solve. So Xenos reaches the region of her stomach and uses his healing magic to perform a quick operation. In an instant, the gallstone is removed, and Tio no longer feels any pain, so she asks what he did. Xenos then explains directly, saying that he quickly opened her stomach, removed the gallstone, and closed her stomach again, all in a fraction of a second, and still managed to do it without leaving any scars. This is a completely normal procedure for him. Xenos does not believe he did anything special, but Tio knows that surely no other healer in the kingdom could do something like that. She then thanks him for healing her, but Xenos tells the girl that a simple thank you is not enough. He invested time and money in her, so he will need Tio to use her body to repay him. Initially, Tio believes that Xenos desires her body, but in reality, he only wants her to work hard, giving her instructions to find a specific plant that he is looking for. Tio finds this request a little strange, but when Xenos said he wanted to use her body, he meant for her to use her nose. She then leads him to a bush with the leaves he was looking for, and asks if that is really all he wants from her. because as a good slave and a very obedient girl, she is willing to do everything he wants. But Xenos says that this is already enough, because he always demands a fair price for the services he provides. And the fact that she helped him find those leaves was all he needed from her. In other words, all of the girl's debts have been settled, and now she is free to do whatever she wants with her life. With that said, Xenos tears up Tio's slavery contract, and the girl feels a little lost, not knowing what to do, since she does not even know what life is like for someone who is not a slave. At the same time, she is willing to try all kinds of new things, all thanks to helping Xenos. She asks if she can continue by his side, and Xenos replies that if one day she gets hurt, he will heal her with pleasure. But obviously, he will not do it for free. And while Xenos was out working, Lily began preparing dinner. The food smelled very good, so much that even Carmilla, a ghost who lives in the house, came down to see what was being cooked. Lily noticed her presence, and Carmilla said she was excited to try the food. But she would wait in her room, because Lily said it would take a little longer for the food to be ready. At that moment, a girl named Zopia enters, looking for Xenos, but Lily informs her that he is out on a house visit, so he is not there at the moment. Zopia had expected to have Xenos just for herself, which is why she arrived earlier today, but since he is not there, she decides to wait until he returns. And Zopia was not the only one wanting to see Xenos today. A while later, Linga also appears looking for him. Lily informs her that Xenos is not there, so Linga says she will wait, but ends up surprised to see that Zofia is already there. In her mind, Linga reveals that her goal was literally to lick Xenos from head to toe while he cared for her body. But now her entire plan has gone down the drain. A few moments later, an orca girl named Loie suddenly enters through the door, so Lily goes to her and says that she can indeed join them inside, but only after fixing the door that she herself broke. It turns out that Loie also has a crush on Xenos, but today she actually came because she smelled the food Lily made from kilometers away, and she is dying to try it. In the end, Lily finishes cooking and goes to take care of other tasks, leaving everyone in the kitchen. This was the biggest mistake she made that day, because as soon as Lily leaves, the girls cannot resist the wonderful smell of the food she made. So they all go to try a little. They decide not to eat everything at once. Initially, their plan was just to taste it and not finish it all. But in the end, they leave the pot empty, and only after eating everything do they start realizing how big a mistake they made, because Lily will certainly be furious when she returns. And as expected, when Lily returns and sees everything that happened, she smiles at the girls and does not let it go. She asks what happened, and each of the girls begins blaming the others. Later that night, when Xenos finally returns home, Lily appears in front of him and apologizes that dinner is not ready as she had promised. She explains that there was a problem with the food, and to fix it, she sent the girls out to get the ingredients, so she could make a new dinner. When the girls returned, they ended up coming back with far too many supplies, and with that amount of ingredients, Lily decided to make a real feast. But before that, since she knew that Xenos must have worked hard all day, she said she would prepare a very special cup of tea for him to relax a little. And it was at that moment that Xenos thought a bit about his life. In the past, he was part of a very high-level group of adventurers, but one day, Astan, the leader of that group, decided to expel Xenos, giving him only a single gold coin as a farewell. At the time, Astan said without even disguising it that Xenos was just a dead weight in the group, who only caused trouble, and that their group would be much better without him. But the truth is that Xenos was the only link that kept the entire group together. However, his foolish companions never realized this. Astan revealed in front of Xenos that he had only recruited him to use him as a human shield, since no one would care if he was killed in battle. But now that his group had become strong, he no longer needed Xenos for anything. At the time, Xenos tried to tell Astan that the only reason they were strong was because he was there to heal everyone infinitely. But to Astan, Xenos' healing abilities were worthless, and any other healer could have done a better job than him. At that same time when Xenos was being expelled from his group, in an alley, two slave traffickers were trying to capture Lily. Their goal was to tie her up and then sell her, and they were doing everything very carefully so as not to hurt Lily. since elves are very rare and they could get more money if she was in good condition. Poor Lily was pinned to the ground, but she refused to fall without a fight, so she delivered a strong kick to the man's groin. While he writhed in pain, she took the opportunity to run away. She would probably have escaped them. But unfortunately, one of the men had a bow and shot an arrow straight into her ankle. Lily fell to the ground, unable to run anymore, and the man reached her again. He tried to grab her, but Lily bit his hand, determined not to give up her life. Her bite was so strong that the man had to stab her to free himself. At that moment, Xenos was passing by that alley and found Lily lying on the ground, bleeding and close to death. He asked the two men if they had done that to her, and the two men told him to go to hell, saying that having slaves in this country is completely legal, and that they were Lily's owners, so they could do whatever they wanted with her. Xenos knew that legally, he could do nothing to help Lily. At that moment, he had an idea. He asked the men if he could buy the girl who was about to die, offering his gold coin that he had received from Astan. Normally, the men would not have accepted, since elf slaves are worth much more than a single gold coin. However, since Lily was injured and about to die on the ground, they decided to take the money and leave. After they left, calling Xenos an idiot, Xenos quickly checked if Lily was still alive. The little girl had already accepted her fate and asked Xenos to leave her there, but he responded, saying she would not die. At that moment, Lily realized that she was no longer feeling pain. She looked at her wound and noticed that it had disappeared. It turned out that Xenos had completely healed her body. She was very happy to have been saved and apologized for the gold coin he spent to buy her. But Xenos said he did not want to keep that money anyway, because that coin only reminded him of his old group. He asked little Lily if she had a home to go to, but since she was a slave, she had no money and no roof to live under. She was also very hungry, so Xenos offered to buy food and clothes for her, taking her to a nearby diner. He also bought a new set of clothes for her on the way. While very happy, Lily asked Xenos why he had not bought anything for himself to eat. Xenos told the girl that he was not hungry, but in reality, he simply had no money. He had spent everything he had to buy Lily's clothes and food, and since he had been expelled from his group, he still needed to find a new job to avoid starving. At that moment, a man stumbled into the diner, and it was noticeable that his arm was injured. The man had gotten into a big trouble but managed to survive. However, due to that injury, he only had two options, either amputate his arm or die over time. Xenos glanced at him from the other side of the room, and sees that the hole in the man's arm has some light marks. He then quickly deduces that the man must have been shot by a magical weapon. Fortunately, since that guy is a lizard man, the wound will probably close on its own, but it would be best to take care of everything now. Xenos then extends his hand to heal the man, and in a few seconds, the hole in his arm closes completely. The man is surprised that his arm has returned to normal, so he asks who Xenos is. Even before he can answer, Lily loudly says that Xenos is a legendary healer. The man has never heard of the name Xenos, but he is very grateful for the help. So he gives him some coins and promises to spread the word that a legendary healer exists in the slums. Xenos is a little confused to have received money right away, but then he realizes that healers are usually paid for healing others, and this gives him a big idea. This time, instead of joining a group of adventurers, he will open a clinic to heal people. But since he is a commoner, he will never be able to get an official healer license. Furthermore, running a business would mean paying taxes, so Xenos decides that he will become an underground healer. Lily does not quite understand what he is talking about, but if Xenos is going to open a clinic, she wants to help him. However, Xenos does not think this is a good idea, because opening a clinic without a license is illegal, and he does not think it is right to involve an innocent child in it. But Lily reminds him that he bought her, and this technically makes him her master, so her duty is to follow him. Xenos remembers that he did not really intend to become her master. He actually just wanted to help a poor, innocent girl, but Lily is a very intelligent child. She says she has nowhere to go, so if he does not take her with him, she might end up becoming a slave again for someone. In the end, Xenos gives in to the emotional blackmail and agrees to keep Lily with him. In response, she promises that she will serve Xenos with every inch of her body. Xenos finds her words a little strange and asks her not to say anything weird. Anyway, Xenos is determined to open a clinic, but before that, he needs to solve an urgent problem. It turns out that he does not even have a place to sleep, so he takes Lily to an abandoned part of the city to try to find somewhere they can stay. Lily asks why he wants to live there, and Xenos explains that he needs to stay hidden because no important person can discover that he is setting up an illegal clinic. Also, since this place is scary, he can choose any place to stay for free. Lily perfectly understands her master's line of reasoning, but she is still worried, because abandoned places like this are full of frightening ghosts. Even knowing this, Xenos goes ahead and ends up finding a house that, surprisingly, is still intact. Xenos is happy and says they got lucky, but as soon as Lily sees the place, she panics, because this house seems haunted, and if they stay there, they might encounter a specter. Xenos does not even know what a specter is. So Lily explains that specters are sinister, undead monsters that can turn people into ghosts with a single touch. Xenos perfectly understands what a specter is, so Lily offers to use her magic to light up the place. Xenos is surprised to discover that Lily can use magic, but she quickly clarifies that she can only use basic spells. Now, with the room illuminated, they can finally see everything clearly, and for Lily, the house is very scary. But still, Xenos remains optimistic. He says the roof is still intact and the support pillars are strong, so this place is perfect for him to set up his clinic. However, a big problem arises. There is a specter living there, and the specter warns that it will drain Xenos' life force. Lily starts to go crazy with fear, but Xenos is disappointed that the house already has an owner. The specter, called Carmilla, attacks Xenos, but he deals with her quickly using a healing spell, which ends up destroying both her arms. He does not feel the least bit intimidated by Carmilla, because when he was part of the Golden Phoenix group, Aston used to send him to the labyrinth alone every time he was in a bad mood, and down there, Xenos would encounter specters. So he has already defeated at least 100. This is all because healing magic is extremely effective against the undead. Returning to the present, Xenos apologizes to Carmilla for entering her house this way, but he explains that there is no other place nearby to live. He asks if she minds his presence too much. However, Carmilla feels deeply offended. After all, she is the queen of the specters. In response, she summons a ton of ghost servants to drive him out of the house, but Xenos reacts by casting a powerful healing spell that eliminates them all at once. Carmilla is completely shocked by Xenos' power and begins to fear for her own life. However, Xenos makes it clear that he does not intend to fight her, and he would feel bad exterminating a specter who can speak and even resembles a human being. He knows that Carmilla, even as a specter, still needs a place to stay, so he asks if she would be willing to give him and Lily at least a room, and a space where they could attend their future patients. Carmilla, knowing she has no chance of defeating Xenos, yields to his pressure, and says he can stay on the first floor, but the entire second floor will be hers. Xenos is happy with this arrangement, and poor Lily does not know whether she should fear Carmilla, or fear Xenos even more. A few days later, we see that Lily is extremely bored. Since they have no work to do, she asks Xenos if she should go out to do some advertising. But Xenos believes it is not a good idea, because the Royal Hospital might discover this place. Besides, it should not take long for them to get their first client. A few minutes after he says this, someone enters the clinic. Lily gets up to greet the first client and is surprised to see that it is the man Xenos healed a few days ago. Xenos had already expected him to show up sooner or later, because people who normally follow the law usually do not end up getting shot, and people who do not follow the law probably cannot go to normal hospital. The man introduces himself as Zond and says he needs Xenos to look at his sister. Xenos says he will do what he can, and Zofia shows a superficial wound. She says her arm has felt strange since the previous day. After examining the injury, Xenos deduces that she was hit by some kind of poison attributed magic. Zofia asks if there is anything he can do about it, but since she spent the entire night with her arm like that, all the tissue in the area is practically dead. Xenos says the best thing to do is amputate the entire arm, to prevent the poison from spreading. Zofia is sad to learn that she will have to lose an arm, but there is nothing to be done, as her life is more important. She asks Xenos how much it will cost to amputate her arm, and he says it will cost 1 million yen. Zond becomes furious because that is an absurd price for a simple amputation. He prepares to start a fight with Xenos, but Zofia asks him to calm down and tries to negotiate with Xenos. She asks if he will really charge such a high amount knowing that she is Zofia, called Tornado by everyone, the leader of one of the 3 gangs controlling that area. Xenos knows perfectly well who she is, but he refuses to work for free, especially because using regeneration magic is very exhausting. Zofia then says that he is only going to amputate her arm, which does not seem very tiring, but Xenos says he intends to amputate and completely regenerate her arm. This leaves Zofia very confused, as she has never heard of a healer who could regenerate limbs. Xenos is also confused, because for him, any other healer could do this. He did not train to be an official healer, so he does not know exactly what is considered normal. But at this moment, that does not matter to him. He asks Zofia if she wants to proceed, and she agrees to pay the very high amount. Xenos places her on a table and prepares to amputate her arm. He creates a magical scalpel, and Zofia is a little worried because she has never seen anything like it before. Xenos explains that the blade he created is made of condensed magic and that he can conjure several at will. The blade is super sharp and completely three-dimensional, making it perfect for performing surgeries. But everything he is saying is special for him, because not every healer can do this. Xenos then begins the operation, using a constant flow of healing magic to anesthetize the area. He then cuts the infected arm and prepares to regenerate a new one. He increases the power of the healing magic and begins reforming Zofia's arm layer by layer, until it looks completely new. Zofia is amazed and extremely grateful that Xenos has actually regenerated her arm. She says she will pay even more for the service, and also promises to start sending his injured subordinates to his clinic. Xenos, of course, agrees to this, and in response, he says that he does not mind, as long as they all pay for their treatments. In the following days, we see Xenos demonstrating a lot of patience with the Lizard Men's faction, and as always, Lily prepares tea so he can relax. Xenos thanks her for being so attentive, but he finds it strange that she made 3 cups instead of 2. Lily says she made a little tea for Carmilla to drink as well, but Xenos is not sure if she will want to join them downstairs. However, apparently, Carmilla really likes tea. While they are taking a break, Lily asks Xenos if he knows why the lizard men keep getting injured so much. Based on the people he has treated so far, Xenos believes there is a territorial war between different factions. Speaking of factions, it seems that someone from one of them has just broken down the door. Quickly, a group of werewolves invades the clinic, and their leader, Linga, declares that she will kill Xenos. It turns out she has been fighting the lizard men for days, but no matter how many enemies she manages to wound, they always come back stronger, so she decided to eliminate their healer. Poor Xenos does not even work for the lizard men's faction. He tries to explain this, while saying that he wants to avoid any violence in his shop, but Linga has already ordered her men to kill Xenos. In response, he uses his defensive magic, and nothing they try manages to move him, much less cause any damage. Linga realizes she cannot defeat Xenos, so instead, she decides to destroy his clinic to get rid of him. But this is the worst idea she could have had, because this is also Carmilla's house, and the Queen of the Spectres will not tolerate anyone destroying it. As soon as Linga and the other werewolves see Carmilla, they are terrified, because a specter is a deadly monster that they could never defeat. Carmilla intends to drain the life force of everyone, but Xenos asks her to calm down, because he does not want anyone to die in his clinic. For him, as long as Linga and her men are willing to repair the damage they caused, he will forgive them. Sometime later, we see that things are going very well for Xenos, after he put Linga and the werewolves under control. But one day, an orc arrives and says that her boss wants to meet him. Xenos expected this to happen sooner or later, because he has already had to deal with the 2 gang leaders in the slums. Alo is the leader of the orcs and ogres, and since she made a fortune mining magical stones with her brute strength, she is very well known in the slums. The good side of this is that after he deals with her, Xenos will no longer need to worry about anyone meddling with his shop, so he decides to take care of it quickly. Before leaving, he asks the orc if Alo is the type of person he can talk to. In response, the orc tells Xenos that she is the wisest and most dignified person he will ever meet. Xenos is happy to hear this, but he is curious why an orc did not bring Alo with him. The orc explains that she cannot move at the moment, and Xenos realizes that she will probably be another patient he will need to take care of. So he runs, and the orc takes him to a cave and introduces Xenos to Alo. She is happy to finally meet him. But before he does anything, Xenos asks how she found out about him. She explains that the lizard men and the werewolves have been talking and gushing about the super secret healer. And while everyone comments about him, They avoid sharing personal information. The fact that everyone gossips about him somewhat defeats his goal of being a clandestine healer. Xenos plans to deal with that later. Alo says that according to what she has heard, Xenos can heal any injury, as long as a fair price is paid, and she wants to see if he is really good. Xenos walks up to her and raises his hand. Alo asks what he is doing. Xenos explains that he cannot see any external injury on her body, so he is examining to see if there is anything wrong inside. Alo was surprised to hear this, since most healers cannot do that. But for Xenos, this should be standard practice. After all, how can you treat a patient if you do not know what kind of internal injuries they have? Anyway, when Xenos finishes his examination, he identifies a lump in Alo's abdomen. Since the lump is emanating mana, he concludes that she swallowed a mana stone. Alo confirms that he is correct, and that this particular mana stone is enchanted with explosion magic. So if she moves from that spot, she could explode. Xenos asks if someone tried to assassinate her by putting it in her food. But Alo says it was nothing like that. She was just very hungry and mistook the stone for a rice cake, so she ended up eating it. She says anyone could have made the same mistake, which is a lie. He would never eat a magical stone thinking it was a rice cake. In response, Xenos says there is no reason for her to worry, because sooner or later, that mana stone will come out of her backside. He prepares to leave, but Aloa says it is not that simple. When she ate the stone, she chewed part of it, so there isn't much time before it detonates. She has accepted that she will die because of her mistake, but her current concern is that her best men refuse to leave her side. Xenos asks what she expects him to do, and she explains that she just wanted him to come there, so she could donate all her wealth to him. When she explodes, it will mean the end of the empire she built, so she prefers to give all the money to someone who will make good use of it rather than let it fall into the wrong hands. While researching Xenos, she discovered that although he charges high prices for healing, he has a rule to treat children for free, so he must be a good person. She throws him a key and explains that he can use it to access her treasure vault when she is dead. In response, Xenos makes it clear that she will not die, because the fact that she hasn't exploded means she ate the mana stone very recently. So Xenos summons his scalpel and goes to her, and without saying a word, he begins cutting Aloa's stomach. At first, her men try to stop him, but then Xenos grabs the explosive mana stone. In just a few seconds, he manages to open Aloa's stomach, retrieve the stone, and heal the incision, so she no longer has to worry about the future of all her money because she will not die. However, the mana stone is still highly volatile, so for everyone's safety, Xenos holds it in his hands and squeezes it until it explodes. This explosion would have been enough to destroy an entire neighborhood, but Xenos protected his hands with his defensive magic, so he is perfectly fine. Although his hand still hurts a lot, he then returns the key to Alo and says she no longer needs to worry about donating her entire fortune. She is still having difficulty believing that Xenos actually chose to save her, instead of just taking all her money. But he says he only needs a fair price for his healing, and that her entire fortune would have been far too much. After being treated, Alo really comes to like Xenos. She tells him that if he ever needs help, all he has to do is ask, and she will do everything in her power to assist him. She even offers her men to provide security for his clinic. But Xenos prefers to keep his distance, because having Aloa's men around would certainly only cause more problems. A few days pass, and Lily is upset at the reception, because Zofia, Linga, and Aloa have been visiting the clinic very frequently. Xenos thinks about this. He has really seen them a lot recently, and they never seem injured, so he starts to wonder why they bother coming. He assumes they are just bored, but Carmilla tells him that these women are clearly in love with him. Xenos doesn't understand why they would like him, since he is just an ordinary healer. But Carmilla says he is anything but ordinary, and as a very experienced woman, she knows what she is talking about. Lily reveals that she is a little worried that one of them might end up dating him, but Xenos says he would never date any of them, because to him, they are just a bunch of weirdos. Still, Carmilla thinks it is only a matter of time before the three of them go to war with each other to decide who will have Xenos, but Xenos believes this will never happen. However, the next day, Zofia arrives with a basket of fruit for Xenos, and says she is thinking about starting a war against the other factions for an unspecified reason. Linga and Louis do exactly the same thing, and no matter how much Xenos protests, they refuse to listen to him. Carmilla finds all of this very amusing and jokes that many people will die because of Xenos' flirtatious nature. but he doesn't like the way she is talking, even though she is just telling the truth. The deadly battle is scheduled to begin at noon today, but Xenos knows he cannot let everyone kill each other because of him, so he needs to do something. Meanwhile, the three factions had already gathered in the stadium with all their men, ready to start the bloodbath. Just as the bloodbath begins, Xenos suddenly appears, and everyone turns to see what he is going to say, but he tells them he is not there to stop the fight. He knows that all of them carry long-standing grudges against each other, so he will let them fight until they are satisfied. Since Xenos gave approval for the battle, the girls decide to fight with everything they have, and whoever survives can claim Xenos' virginity. This is the agreement they made. Xenos doesn't remember agreeing to this last part, but before he can say anything, the fight begins. Zofia makes the first move and tries to cut Linga's head off with her dagger, but Linga manages to dodge in time and flips backward. Meanwhile, Lois approaches and tries to kick Zofia, but Zofia gets out of the way, and instead, several spectators in the background are hit. Zofia and Linga face each other again, but before they can land a hit on each other, Lois suddenly appears and almost crushes them both. Zofia is pushed toward the corner where the orcs in the stadium are, so she starts attacking the orcs, and the others begin doing the same to members of the opposing factions. It is a horrific scene. People are being slashed everywhere, but to everyone's shock, even after fighting for 6 hours, no one has died yet. At that moment, Zofia notices that the wounds on her arm are healing rapidly, and Xenos reveals that he is the one behind it. He agreed to let them have their little deadly battle, but he never agreed to let any of them die, because after all, they are still his patients. Zofia feels a little stupid for not realizing what Xenos had been doing until now, but none of them knew it was possible for a healer to heal so many people at the same time, let alone continuously for more than 6 hours. They realize that at this rate, the fight will never end, and that is exactly the point Xenos was trying to show. He says that if they never come to an understanding, they will never be able to live in peace. Therefore, if they feel the need to continue fighting, he will be there to heal all of them. And just to be clear, he will charge for each healing he performs. After all of this, the girls realize how foolish it was to start a war over Xenos, so they all agree to get along with each other. However, they will still continue fighting because of him, but from now on, they promise not to be violent. Meanwhile, Lily asks Xenos why he went through so much trouble to do this. He then remembers something his teacher once told him. A healer who only treats ordinary injuries is a third-tier healer. One who can heal the entire body is second tier, and a first-tier healer is someone who can make the world a better place. So although Xenos does not believe he has what it takes to be a first-tier healer, he still wants to try to make the slums a better place to live. Besides, if he let them all die here, he would no longer have patients to treat at his clinic. At least, that's his excuse, but Lily knows he is only saying that to hide how much he really cares for everyone. If the demi-human factions start getting along, it would mean Xenos wouldn't have as many patients as before. Yet he still decided to help them. This is part of the reason why Lily likes him so much, and she tells him directly, hoping Xenos will be impressed. But Xenos doesn't really understand what she means after all. His mind is much purer than Lily's. Anyway, it is getting late, so he plans to receive his payment and return home. Lily is surprised because she thought he was joking when he said he would charge them for the healing during the fight. But Xenos was very serious. Healing so many people is exhausting, so of course he wants to be paid for it. Meanwhile, in the capital, the commander of the Royal Knights is meeting with the vice commander, Christina. She asks the commander if something happened, and he explains that he heard a rumor that the war between the demi-humans suddenly ended. She is surprised to hear this, since the demi-humans have been at war over slum territory for years, so she finds it hard to believe that they suddenly decided to get along. The commander also doesn't fully believe it, but if it is true, he needs to do something about it. This kingdom has existed with the royalty and nobility at the top for centuries, and it has remained that way because all the poor people are treated unjustly and are usually too busy arguing among themselves to be a significant threat. However, if they were at peace, the poor and the demi-humans could end up forming a united front and start demanding things like universal healthcare. And they do not intend to give that right to anyone, only to the rich. The commander says that the rumors suggest a single individual managed to mediate between the demi-humans, so that they stopped fighting. Therefore, the commander wants Christina to investigate this person. Christina understands, and she promises to find this man and arrest him for the crime of bringing peace. Meanwhile, at Zeno's clinic, he sneezes because so many people are talking about him. And as soon as that happens, everyone worries that he might have caught a cold. Linga offers to let them use her tail as a cover, and Lois offers to let him warm his face between her thick thighs. Zenos tells them he only sneezed normally and that he still needs to heal Zofia, so he asks them to calm down until he finishes. Zenos heals Zofia's arm, and she thanks him for the help, but it has been a while since he last treated her, so he asks how she got hurt. Zofia explains that she injured herself while working the night before. It turns out her job is stealing from rich people, and she redistributes all that money to the poor. But when she was sneaking into an aristocrat's house the previous day, she was attacked by the vice commander of the Royal Knights. Carmela senses that drawing Christina's attention could spell big trouble for Zenos, but he believes he doesn't need to worry about it, because it's impossible for such an important vice commander to meet with a random clandestine healer like him. Meanwhile, Christina herself is in the slums searching for information about Zeno. She sees that all the demi-humans are getting along very well, so she approaches a lizard man and asks him to tell her who was responsible for ending the war between the demi-humans. Since the lizard man doesn't know who this human is, and he also knows Zenos wants to remain discreet, he only tells her he cannot say anything. He tries to walk away, but Christina draws her weapon and says she will shoot him if he doesn't answer. Even so, the lizard man is willing to take a bullet for Zeno's sake, so he tells her to go ahead and shoot. At that moment, Zofia and her brother pass by, and Christina is not prepared to deal with so many enemies now, so she decides to flee. She ends up getting lost in the abandoned part of the city, and by chance, she comes face to face with Zeno's clinic. She enters to ask for information, and Zenos attends to her very well, even offering to show her the way back to the main city. But at that moment, Lily appears with some tea, and as soon as Christina sees Lily's elf ears, she shoots Zenos in the head with her gun. Lily cannot believe that Christina would simply shoot Zenos in the head for no reason, but Christina says she has a perfectly justifiable reason. Besides her current mission, she has also been tasked with investigating a series of recent kidnappings in the area. Since Zenos is human and Lily is an elf, she immediately assumed that Zenos had kidnapped Lily, and that is why she reacted by shooting him in the head. Lily then explains that Zenos basically adopted her, and that she is living there of her own free will. Christina realizes she may have jumped to conclusions. She thinks for a moment and notices that Lily seems like a very happy and well-cared-for girl, so she may have made a huge mistake. At least she used non-lethal bullets, so she is sure she did not kill Zenos. But at the same time, she is not sure if he survived. She thinks he may have just been knocked unconscious by the shot. However, to her surprise, Zenos seems perfectly fine. She apologizes for jumping to conclusions and for shooting him like that, but she is still curious to know how he managed to come out unharmed. He says he just used defensive magic to block the bullets before they hit him, but Christina doesn't believe it, because no ordinary defensive magic should be able to stop her bullets. However, as far as Zenos knows, his defensive magic is completely ordinary, so he has no idea what she is talking about. However, over her years as vice commander of the Royal Knights, Christina has seen many defensive magic, and she knows that Zenos' shields are on the same level as a great wizard. When Christina mentions that she is vice commander of the Royal Knights, Zenos and Lily become nervous, as they know that her presence could mean trouble for them. And apparently, Christina has something for which she wants to ask Zenos for help. To avoid another confrontation, Zenos agrees to talk to her, but he also sends a warning to all his clients so that none of them show up while Christina is around. They all sit down, and Christina tells Zenos that she is currently on a secret mission in the area, and she would like his help. Zenos responds by saying he doesn't want to get involved, but Christina insists, saying that it is every citizen's duty to cooperate with the orders of the knights. Since Christina is a hot-tempered girl, Zenos is afraid that she might shoot him again, so he decides to play along with her. She informs him that her mission is to find a particular man and arrest him immediately. She doesn't have a name or a description, but this man was the mediator and the person who ended the war between the different factions. Zenos spits out the tea he was drinking when he realizes that the person Christina is trying to arrest is himself, but he tries to remain calm and asks why she is hunting this mediator. Christina explains that the knights simply cannot ignore someone with the power to bring peace among the faction. But when she tried to interrogate one of the local residents violently, he refused to say anything even under her threats. In Christina's mind, if the people in the slums are unwilling to hand over the mediator, that can only mean he is an evil genius who needs to be stopped. Xenos tries to explain to her that it is possible the mediator is just trying to avoid the spotlight, meaning the best course would be for her to leave and stop looking for him, because then this mediator won't cause any problems. Christina then asks Xenos if he knows who the mediator is, so he invents an excuse and says he just spoke out of instinct. In any case, Christina cannot simply ignore the mediator, because she received a direct order from her commander. And to the knights, anyone with the power to stop the war between the factions is too great a threat to be ignored. Lily speaks up and says that Christina doesn't need to worry about the mediator destabilizing the nation, because he is only interested in earning money through his honest work. But the way Lily talks about the mediator, it almost sounds like she knows him personally. Lily panics and starts telling Christina that she doesn't actually know the mediator either. And Christina starts to be suspicious, but she lets it go for the moment because she is foolish. As it is getting late, Xenos tries to use that as an excuse to kick Christina out. But while he pushes her toward the door, she notices a bed in the corner. She finds it strange that Xenos put a bed there, and he doesn't want to explain the reason for it. So he says it's just an extra bed. As soon as Christina hears this, she asks Xenos if he would be willing to let her use the bed. She is having difficulty moving around the slum, so she would like Xenos to let her stay there until the end of her mission. Of course, she is willing to pay for the accommodation. Xenos cannot refuse without raising suspicion, so he ends up agreeing. And Carmilla finds all of this very amusing. Lily prepares some green tea for the new guest, but Christina doesn't like hot drinks, so she starts blowing on the tea. Lily is still very jealous of having a new woman there trying to steal Xenos' heart. So to show her superiority, Lily asks him to pat her on the head as usual. Xenos does what Lily wants, but is a little confused by her random request. Carmilla approaches and says that Lily is jealous, and Xenos is startled because Carmilla whispered it in his ear while invisible, and she is clearly having a lot of fun with all this drama. Lily makes it even more fun for Carmilla by flattering Xenos even more, showing that she is the dominant girl. But Christina doesn't seem to care at all and just continues blowing on her tea. In the end, Lily falls asleep, so Xenos puts her in bed and returns to the living room to continue the conversation with Christina. Xenos begins to explain the whole story of how he rescued Lily from a group of slave traffickers. It seems these traffickers were part of an illegal trafficking network operating in that region, which explains why Lily was so agitated and defensive earlier. Unfortunately, Xenos doesn't have any concrete information about these traffickers. Changing the subject, Christina says she has a question she wants to ask. Since it is quite clear that Xenos must be a master mage who has perfected his defensive magic, Christina wants to know if it is possible to regenerate an entire arm if someone dedicates themselves to healing magic as much as Xenos has dedicated himself to defensive magic. Xenos begins to respond by asking a question, asking Christina if this is something so extraordinary for a healer. But before he can finish, Christina interrupts and says that restoring a destroyed arm should be impossible. According to her, the only people capable of doing that would be the saints. Xenos then asks why she wants to know about all this, and Christina explains that she recently got into a fight with Zofia, and she remembers having caused significant damage to her arm. But when she saw Zofia the day before, her arm was like new, fully healed, which made Christina believe that there is a healer in the slums with enough power to regenerate an arm. If that is true, it would make total sense for this person to have great influence over the leaders of the factions. After saying all this, Christina says she will try to find clues that lead her to this supposed evil healer. But Xenos doesn't understand why she believes this healer is someone evil. The truth is that Christina has a very negative view of all the people in the slums. She is blonde and racist, a girl exactly the way a friend of mine named Joe likes. But Xenos doesn't believe she is just racist, so he asks if she has any reason to distrust everyone in the slums. Christina admits that she is a bit too harsh with the people in the slums because someone from the slums killed her mother. Christina's mother was a very kind woman who really wanted to help as many people as possible. Her mother would frequently go to the slums and organize events to feed those who couldn't afford food. But one day, she simply didn't return home. And according to witnesses, Christina's mother was attacked and killed by someone who wanted to steal her wedding ring. Christina was completely devastated to hear this. Her mother saved so many people from hunger, but no one was there to save her when she needed it. Because of this, Christina decided to join the Order of the Royal Knights, becoming the youngest vice commander and an invincible heroine capable of delivering justice to criminals in the slums. The next day, Christina goes out to resume her investigation, and Zenos can finally return to treating his patients. Zofia arrives with a small wound on her arm and would like Zenos to take a look at it. Zenos begins to heal her but warns her to be more careful, since they never know when Christina will appear. Just as they mention this, Christina shows up asking for information because she got lost while out. As soon as Christina sees Zofia, she draws her weapons, and Zofia draws her knives in retaliation. The two reach a standoff, and Christina asks Zofia if there really is an evil healer gathering criminals to start a rebellion. In response, Zofia doesn't deny that there is a healer, but she assures her that he is not an evil person. For Christina, however, Zofia is just a thief, so she is not exactly a law-abiding citizen. In response, Zofia says that nobles do much worse things. For example, Zofia heard that Christina is investigating a trafficking network, and after doing some research, Zofia discovered that the person behind all this is a noble named Kalendor. Upon hearing this, Christina doesn't believe her, because according to her information, the trafficking network is concentrated in the slums. But Zofia says this is just a clever trick to disrupt the Knight's Order and prevent them from reaching the real culprit. Christina is skeptical but asks Zofia to tell her who is behind the kidnapping. Zofia explains again that a noble named Kalendor is responsible for all this. Christina says it is hard to swallow, because Kalendor is a very good man who takes great pride in educating people. In her mind, he would never sell children into slavery. But Zofia never expected Christina to believe her, because in Christina's eyes, everyone from the slums is just a criminal. Unlike Christina, the mediator never treated anyone from the slums that way. He treats everyone equally and is always willing to give a second chance, unlike Christina and her sense of justice. Upon hearing this, Christina becomes furious and prepares to shoot, but Zenos steps in front and asks her to lower her weapon. Christina tries to get Zenos to move, but he says he cannot do that because Zofia is his patient, and he cannot allow her to get hurt. He apologizes for not saying this earlier, and right to her face, he admits that he is the mediator Christina was looking for. Christina believes that Zenos is lying to protect Zofia, since there's no way he could be the healing mediator after all. He is a master of defensive magic. In response, Zenos says he doesn't consider himself exactly a master, but he is sure that he is skilled in both his healing magic and defensive magic, since both exist only to enhance the natural functions of the body. None of this makes sense to Christina, so she still doesn't believe he is the healer. But since it's clear that he is on Zofia's side and not hers, she decides to leave without causing trouble, out of respect for the hospitality he showed the previous day. As she leaves, Lily notices Christina walking toward the district where all the nobles live, and Zenos suddenly realizes where she must be going. Christina took seriously what Zofia said about the noble Kalendor, and she went to his mansion to have a conversation. Obviously, she cannot arrive at Zenos thinking he is responsible for a child trafficking network, so she invents an excuse for her visit. She says she heard about a recent increase in thefts in the area, and Kalendor admits that he's had some trouble with the Dropped Men gang lately. Christina says she is planning to increase security patrols in the area, but before that, she wants to take a look at Kalendor's mansion to understand how his personal security works. Kalendor understands and offers to show her the entire mansion. Christina is then guided throughout the mansion, and after the tour, Kalendor asks what she thought of his security. She praises the mansion's security, but notices something strange during her visit. She asks if she can use the bathroom before leaving, and Kalendor doesn't see any problem with that. Christina leaves his office. Kalendor is a high-ranking aristocrat, so it's not strange that he has a high level of security. But what is strange is that he is making an extra effort to protect the back part of the mansion. For some reason, he placed many patrol guards there. She realizes that Kalendor is hiding a secret, so she looks over the wall and finds a well that leads to the basement. She goes down the well and discovers that Zofia was right. Kalendor is indeed the person behind all the kidnappings, but before Christina could do anything to help the children, Kalendor appears behind her and uses the weapons she left upstairs to blow off her arm. He finds it funny that he managed to get rid of a knight so easily, and even says to her face that she made a mistake trying to snoop around his house. Now all he needs to do is finish her off to continue his child trafficking operation. But before he can do anything, Zofia and Xenos appear. Xenos had been worried about the possibility of Christina getting hurt when he realized where she was going, so he asked Zofia to show him the way there. Kalendor refuses to leave any witnesses alive, so he sets Christina's weapon to lethal mode and shoots at Xenos. But to his total surprise, Xenos is still unharmed after being hit. Kalendor panics and tries to flee, accidentally dropping his weapon. Xenos seizes the moment and grabs it. Kalendor begins to beg for mercy. Luckily for him, Xenos has a rule of not killing people, but he has no rule against causing pain and suffering. So he sets the weapon to non-lethal mode and shoots directly at Kalendor's head. After that, he goes to check on Christina, but she says it's too late for her. Her arm is gone, and part of her stomach is missing, so she has already accepted her fate. However, Xenos says she will be fine, but he warns that he will charge a lot for it, so she can expect a huge bill. In just a few minutes, Christina is completely healed. She is amazed that Xenos managed to heal such severe wounds so quickly. She realizes he must have been serious when he said he was the mediator, but now she has no interest in arresting him, as she believes he is a true hero. Xenos, however, does not consider himself a hero in this story. He sees himself only as a healer who made sure no one died, and to him, the hero here was Christina, because she was the first to act for the sake of these children. To him, she may sometimes seem misguided, but deep down, she is a kind person who genuinely wants to make the world a better place. Zofia calls her dropped men, and they help remove all the children from this dark place. And as the royal knights were about to arrive there, Xenos decided to leave. However, before he could go, Christina catches up to him and asks why he decided to save her, even though she was his enemy. Xenos turns to her and says that he just wanted to make sure she knew she still owes him, since she still owes money for spending a night at his clinic, and he expects full payment from her, including the cost of the healing. With that said, he bids her farewell. After resolving this major problem, he no longer has to worry about Christina, and finally, his life returns to normal alongside Lily. But Xenos' life was not always so peaceful. When he was a child, he was an orphan with no money, living in the slums, with nothing in his favor, so he spent all his time sitting in an alley. One day, Xenos was walking through the slums, trying to decide which child he wanted to kidnap. But he was very sad wandering through the slums because no child seemed like a good human shield. It was at that moment that Astan spotted Xenos and decided to take him. He approached Xenos and began talking to him. At the time, Astan said that the boy was a poor, doomed kid, unemployed and starving. So if he wanted to improve his life, he should come along on an adventure. In fact, he said all this politely, appearing to be a very good person, just so Xenos would believe him. Xenos hesitated a little to accept the proposal, because those who live in the slums usually don't even have a chance to become adventurers. But Astan said that if he had the skill for it, he could do anything. So he asked Xenos if he could do anything, and Xenos replied that he knew a little magic. However, Astan didn't believe this at all, because to learn any kind of magic, one has to be a noble and practice for many years at the Royal Academy. So in his mind, there's no way an orphan could have learned it on his own. But in the end, it didn't matter whether Xenos knew magic or not. Astan only wanted to use him as a distraction if something went wrong. At the time, Xenos agreed to accompany him, and so he was taken to the forest. There, the two faced a wolf-type monster, while Astan was fighting the creature. He ended up getting slightly injured. Quickly, Xenos used his magic to provide support. Then Astan attacked the creature again, and at that exact moment, Xenos used his healing magic to measure his speed. Thanks to Xenos' assistance, Astan managed to cut off the wolf's head with a single blow. But the foolish Astan didn't realize that he had been healed in the middle of the fight. He didn't even notice that he had suddenly become faster. So after his victory, his ego inflated even more. And to Astan, he was just a very strong guy, while Xenos was a useless guy who just stood there doing nothing. After a few years dealing with things like this, Astan eventually kicked Xenos out of the group. Since then, Xenos' group hasn't been performing very well on their missions. After Astan expelled Xenos, he and the rest of his group went to a cave to carry out a very important mission. Their goal was to complete it quickly to gain favors with powerful nobles in the kingdom. A boy in the group named Yuma says that the sooner they finish the job, the sooner they can return to the inn and continue drinking. Andres is excited because the women always fawn over them when they find out they are members of the Golden Phoenix, a group famous for completing missions and killing magical beasts without suffering any injuries. They quickly encounter the monsters they came to kill, and Astan unsheathes his sword and prepares to attack. He orders Guile to cast a defensive spell on him while he advances, and Guile does exactly that. But even with Galley's magic, while Astan fights the foxes, he feels his arm burning. Meanwhile, Yuma is being attacked by one of the wolves in the back, so he won't be much help right now. Astan shouts for Andres to hurry up and cast some offensive magic, but it takes him a long time to cast the spell, and he ends up getting hit by a fireball in the middle of the incantation. Astan is shocked, wondering if his team has always been this useless. But it's clear that they won't win this fight, so he orders everyone to retreat immediately. Once outside, Astan asks his teammates why they are struggling against monsters that at best are rank B. Andres responds that Astan didn't do much against the foxes either. Guile asks if it's possible that Xenos was telling the truth when he said he was healing the entire group, but Astan didn't think that was possible. According to him, a low-class peasant like Xenos could never know how to use healing magic. Still, for safety, Astan thought it might be a good idea to hire a healer for the group. A few days later, they returned to the cave, now with a healer in the group. The first one was Min, and she immediately warned Astan that she wasn't very good at healing in the middle of a battlefield. Normally, she only performed healing in the capital, but since she already had an adventurer license, she agreed to come with them. Still, Min wondered why the Golden Phoenix needed a healer, since they were famous for completing missions without getting hurt. However, Astan didn't want to explain what had happened, so he told her to mind her own business. Guile then asked Min if Yuma would be okay, since he had been badly beaten by the wolves last time. Min had treated him, so she was sure he would survive, but given the severity of his injuries, there was no way he could go adventuring again. Normally, Astan would show some compassion for a teammate who was permanently incapacitated, but they simply moved on, saying it wasn't worth keeping Yuma around. And if you're wondering why this mission was so important, yes, it was important. They were supposed to hunt a fire fox so that a very important Lord Fennel, could give a special scarf to his daughter. Astan was willing to risk his life for this scarf. However, in just 2 seconds, his plan began to collapse as the foxes suddenly launched a surprise attack. Astan immediately started to retaliate and asked Guile to cast his defensive magic on everyone. But as Astan advanced, he couldn't land a single blow on the foxes. The foxes fired 4 fireballs at him, and Astan managed to block 3 of them. But the last one hit Andreas in the stomach, and he fell. Astan continued trying to hit the foxes, but had no success. Then Alman shouted that they needed to retreat because Andreas was in critical condition. Astan couldn't believe his plan was falling apart once again, and as soon as they got outside, he yelled at Guile, asking why he hadn't used his defensive magic to protect Andreas. However, Alman said that Guile's defensive magic was effective without it. Andreas would have died instantly from that explosion. Andreas asked Alman to hurry and heal him, but she said it wasn't possible. Not even the highest-ranking healers had the power to heal injuries like that without special preparation. So unless they took Andreas to a hospital, he would die. Later, Astan met with Lord Fennel's servant, and the servant said that Lord Fennel was very disappointed with him, because he was sure that Astan could still manage to get the scarf. But his daughter's birthday had already passed, so there was no longer a reason for the hunt. Now Lord Fennel was very disappointed, not only because the Golden Phoenix group failed to complete the missions, but because Astan kept insisting he could handle it. Astan could have told Lord Fennel that the mission was impossible, and Lord Fennel would have accepted it and provided another gift for his daughter. Now, Lord Fennel no longer trusted the Golden Phoenix group. For a second, Astan tried to pin all the blame for this mess on Xenos, but then he remembered that he never officially registered Xenos as a group member. Therefore, Xenos was never part of his group and couldn't be blamed for anything. Astan was forced to lower his head and apologize for all the problems he caused. However, he hated bowing to a servant like that. Astan promised he would make amends, but Lord Fennel's servant asked how he planned to do that. when half of his team was practically dead. In response, Astan said he intended to recruit new members to make up for their losses, and next time Lord Fennel gave them a mission, he would make sure it was completed. With that, Lord Fennel's servant left, but Guile asked Astan if it was really a good idea to make such promises, since they didn't know where to find qualified recruits, and there was no way just the two of them could handle the missions. Astan told Guile not to worry because he already had a plan. Astan still believed that Xenos wasn't worth much, but he couldn't deny that the group had been much better when he was around. So Astan's plan was to bring Xenos back, and he was convinced that Xenos would be desperate to return to the Golden Phoenix. Despite all the terrible treatment he had received, the next day Astan and Guile went to the slums looking for Xenos, but they had no idea where to start. Then Astan had a brilliant idea. He would hire the leaders of the three factions to find Xenos. He was sure they would all agree, because despicable people like them would do anything for money. Shortly after, he asked the lizardman to take him to Zofia, saying he wanted to hire her for a job. When he arrived, Zofia herself said she wasn't interested, because it would interfere with her daily visits to the clinic. However, she was willing to listen to the request of a paying client. Astan introduced himself as the leader of the Golden Phoenix and told Zofia he was looking for a man named Xenos, who had come to the slums about 2 months ago. At first, Zofia couldn't believe what she was hearing, because Xenos had told her everything about how Astan expelled him from the Golden Phoenix. She knew Xenos' great potential and couldn't believe someone could be foolish enough to expel him from a group. She also hadn't expected that Astan himself would be stupid enough to look for Xenos after everything he had done. She told Astan to get out of her sight, because Xenos had better things to do than meet with him. Just looking at Astan made her disgusted. Astan was offended for a moment and even thought about attacking Zofia, but he realized he would get beaten, so he gave up, since Zofia refused to help him. Astan tried asking Linga's faction, but as soon as she found out who Astan was, she told him to leave. Astan was shocked that Linga was also friends with Xenos. Before he could even try to cause trouble, Linga reminded Astan that she could kill him 3 times before he even blinked. Astan then tried asking Louis for help, but like the others, she told him to go to hell, and if she found out he was harassing Xenos, she would personally crush his head. Astan and Guile immediately left Louis' cave, and Astan couldn't believe that the leaders of the slums cared so much about Xenos. He tried to convince himself that everyone was talking about some other guy named Xenos, because to him, it was impossible for Xenos to have so much influence there. Then, suddenly, Guile saw Xenos walking down the street with Lily. Lily and Xenos had just finished the day's shopping and were preparing to go home. Astan suddenly called out to Xenos. Xenos was shocked to see Astan and Guile again, and since he didn't even want to look at them, he started to move away. Astan stopped him and shouted that he had come specifically to welcome Xenos back to the Golden Phoenix. But before he could even finish speaking, Xenos rejected him. Astan couldn't believe it, as he was convinced Xenos would be grateful to return to the group. Xenos began listing all the crap Astan had put him through last time, including the poor treatment and terrible payment. To Xenos, there was literally no reason to return to the Golden Phoenix. However, if Astan was desperate enough, Xenos was willing to accompany him on a few missions if he had the time. But he would no longer work while being exploited, so Astan would have to pay him a good amount this time. Xenos said he would charge 50,000 for basic injury healing and 1 million for critical injuries. Additionally, Astan would have to pay triple those costs for the use of his defensive magic and Xenos buffs. But if Astan didn't want to pay the price, he didn't even need to look for him. After saying this, Xenos continued on his way. But Astan was offended that Xenos dared to reject him, so he drew his sword and tried to attack him from behind. Before he could do anything, he was stopped by Christina. She told Astan he was very stupid for trying to attack someone brazenly in front of a royal knight. She had come to the slums because she wanted to see Xenos, but since Astan had just attempted aggression, she now had to intervene. Astan tried to flee because he didn't want to end up in jail. After all this chaos, Xenos and Lily returned home. Shortly after, Zofia, Linga, and Louis appeared. They told Xenos that Astan had tried to hire them to find him. Even though all of them had refused, Zofia was still concerned that he might continue going after Xenos. She feared that Astan would go to an underground guild and hire an assassin to attack Xenos. But on the other hand, hiring assassins would be very expensive, and if Astan was desperate enough to search for Xenos personally instead of recruiting more members for the group, so he's probably out of money. Even so, Zofia remains concerned because some rumors are circulating about a man called the Guide, who is willing to do certain jobs for free as long as some conditions are met. If Aston manages to convince this guy, it could mean trouble for Xenos. A little later, we see that Xenos can't sleep, all due to the stress of having encountered Aston again. Carmilla comes down to him, probably worried about his health. While she's there, Carmilla asks Xenos if it's true that he learned to use healing magic in the slums. He explains that he had been trying to revive a corpse, and that healing magic naturally emerged for him afterward. Carmilla says resurrection magic is forbidden, but in his defense, he says he had no idea it was prohibited when he first tried it. Speaking of forbidden magic, Carmilla remembers something similar. She says that when she was still alive, there was a type of artificial life, a kind of magic created when the demon lord still existed. At the time, he waged wars using golems created with this type of forbidden magic. At that exact moment, Xenos hears a tremor outside. Carmilla offers to take a look, and to her horror, she sees a huge golem about to destroy everything. It turns out Aston really stooped low enough to try to hire someone to eliminate Xenos. However, he was so out of money that he couldn't pay a normal assassin, so he ended up being directed to the guide. The guide said he could take the job for free, but he wanted to hear the full story to decide if it was worth it. Aston told him everything in detail, and the guide found it amusing that Aston was such a big egotist. Even so, he thought it would be interesting to go after Xenos, since he was looking for a chance to test his new toy. Meanwhile, in the present, Xenos and Carmilla approach the golem, and up close, the damage is far worse. Soon after, Zofia, Linga, and Lois join the group. They ask Xenos for help, as many residents were injured in the chaos caused by the golem. Xenos asks if they have any clue where the golem might have come from, but they say it's still a big mystery. The only thing they know is that the golem came from the deepest part of the slums, but they have no idea where it's going. Upon learning where the golem came from, Xenos begins to suspect that the underground guild might be behind all this. But he knows now is not the time for theories, so he asks the three girls to gather all the injured in one place so he can treat everyone at once. He warns that as soon as this is over, he will go after those responsible for summoning the golem, and they will pay dearly for it. Meanwhile, the guide watches everything from a safe distance, satisfied with his golem's performance. However, he still believes the creature could be more agile. Even so, its power is more than enough to get the job done. The guide doesn't have much information about Xenos, but he's curious to see how he will handle the pain of his friends one by one, right before his eyes. In the city, Linga, Lu, and Zofia mobilize their troops, ordering that all the injured be brought to Xenos. Once everyone is rescued, Xenos prepares to cast a large healing spell. Before doing so, he asks Carmilla to step back, otherwise she could end up being exorcised. Once she steps back, Xenos activates his large area healing ability, and all the injured residents begin to recover almost immediately. He then asks everyone to evacuate the area as quickly as possible. Now his plan is to heal those who were out of reach of his first spell. He's clearly irritated with the situation. He had to rush out in the middle of the night and doesn't even know if he'll get anything in return. Now he's fully determined to find whoever is behind the golem. But the problem is that no one knows where this person is or exactly what they are doing with all of this. On the side of those controlling everything, the guide is surprised by Xenos' ability to heal all the injured. He had believed a good number of people would die in the chaos, but with just a glance, he realizes that Xenos isn't just skilled, he's a true prodigy in healing. However, there's still a problem. Even if he manages to heal everyone, the golem remains active, and as long as it isn't stopped, the destruction will continue. On the other side, Xenos finishes healing the injured and tells Carmilla to see if there's a possibility that the golem will lose motivation and leave. But she explains that golems only stop when they complete the mission for which they were created, and from what it seems, this golem's goal is to destroy the slums, so it will keep going until nothing is left. Moreover, to create a golem, an extremely pure magic stone is required, and these stones should have disappeared after the Great War. Carmilla has no idea how anyone managed to get their hands on such a rare material, and unfortunately, Xenos will have to deal with this problem now before the situation gets worse. The others offer to help in the fight, and Xenos asks if everyone is sure, since he can't guarantee that he will be able to heal everyone in the middle of the battle. Even so, everyone is aware of the risk and says they want to fight alongside him to protect the place they come from. Xenos is happy for the support, but warns that they need to come up with a strategy first. first. He asks Carmilla if she knows how to defeat a golem, and she responds that the only way is to destroy the magic stone that forms its core. If this isn't done, the golem will continue functioning forever. Xenos feels disheartened because his original plan was to sell the core to make some money, but unfortunately, that won't happen. So he tells the three to attack with everything they've got while he provides magical support. As soon as he gives the signal, the three rush forward to face the golem. While the group advances, Xenos activates a speed boost to accelerate their movements. As soon as they are ready to strike, he also activates a strength bonus, allowing the three to attack in perfect synchronization. With this, they manage to destroy one of the golem's legs, and unable to support itself, the creature loses balance and collapses to the ground. But the celebration is short-lived because the golem's magical core guarantees endless regeneration. The creature revives completely, hurling Linga far away. With that single movement, she crashes through 3 houses without stopping. Normally, she should have broken all her bones, but thanks to Xenos' support, she is completely fine. It had been quite some time since Xenos had been involved in a real fight, so he is still getting into rhythm. He knows he only needs to remember 2 important things. The first is that he can't stray too far from the team, or the catalysts lose potency. And since each type of catalyst healing, strength, and speed has its own activation order, he can't use them all at once. He has to choose a buff according to the situation. Watching closely, Xenos notices that the golem's regeneration happens immediately. That is, if they deal enough damage all at once, they could immobilize it. He asks the girls to focus on the creature's 2 legs. When they do, the golem collapses to the ground once again. Zofia notices a little girl hiding inside one of the houses, and the golem is about to fall right on her. Xenos tries to run to save her because he's too far away to use his intensive magic. Even hurrying, he cannot reach her in time. Logically, this girl should be dead, but incredibly, the golem stops before crushing her. This makes no sense because, according to Carmilla, these beings don't have consciousness or the ability to make emotional decisions. Clearly, this golem is different. Xenos finally understands the reason. By scanning the creature's body, he detects a human trapped inside it. The guide is surprised that Xenos discovered this so quickly, but he believes knowing this won't help at all. The magic crystal the guide used was defective, so he couldn't create a golem in the conventional way. He decided to use a human as a base, and Astan proved to be the ideal choice. The guide tricked him by inserting a magic stone into his body and used it to form the golem's core. Since then, Astan and the creature have become a single entity. Now the guide wants to see how Xenos will deal with this revelation. He knows that considering the number of lives Xenos has saved, eliminating someone won't be an easy task. At this moment, we see Xenos take a deep breath and ask everyone to step away from the battle. The girls are confused, as they were almost finishing off the golem, but based on what Xenos discovered, he understands that he needs to face this fight alone. Even without knowing why, they trust him and step back to let him act. Now it's only Xenos facing Astan, and he says it's time for them to settle their accounts. The relationship between the two began when Astan pulled Xenos out of misery, but from the start, there were selfish motives behind it. However, now he has made the decision to save a child. And this makes Xenos remember what Guile had mentioned about Astan's past. When he was young, he lost his sister because he didn't have money to pay for her treatment. Since then, he became obsessed with wealth and power. Seeing that little girl probably reminded Astan of his own sister, which is why he instinctively protected her. But that doesn't erase all the bad things he's done. At least it made Xenos believe there was still some humanity left in him. Even so, it's clear that Astan hasn't been well lately. So Xenos understands that he doesn't have many alternatives. He grabs the by-story, dodges an attack, and transforms his weapon into a sword, cutting Astan's arms. Then he jumps and makes a hole in the golem's chest. Finally seeing Astan's true body, he doesn't feel good about it. But he knows he needs to make sure Astan doesn't continue being a threat. He strikes him firmly in the chest. Guile is shocked to see that Xenos was able to attack Astan with such decisiveness, but considering how badly he was treated by him, it makes sense that Xenos would want revenge. Even so, Xenos isn't trying to kill Astan. He just cuts the parts of his body that were fused with the magic stone and then uses his abilities to heal Astan, keeping him alive. The guide becomes even more frustrated because a technique of this level requires immense concentration, not to mention that Xenos had already performed multiple heals. The truth is, Xenos doesn't care whether Astan lives or dies, but someone has to take responsibility for the damage caused. Since Astan has no money, Xenos would let him die, unless he reveals who is behind the golem's creation. Moreover, even if Astan's life is no longer necessary for this world, Xenos recognizes that if he hadn't received that gold coin as compensation, he wouldn't have been able to save Lily, nor would he have been able to open his clinic. And most importantly, as a healer, Xenos made a vow to save as many lives as he could, even if it included the miserable life of Astan. Without hesitation, Xenos raises his sword and delivers another precise strike to the magic stone, destroying it completely and freeing Astan from the golem's control. With that, the situation finally calms down, and Astan regains consciousness. Now he truly realizes Xenos' greatness. While trapped inside the golem, Astan had been almost fully awake, witnessing how Xenos supported the faction leaders during the battle. This made him understand that Xenos probably did the same when he was part of his old crew. After having been manipulated like a puppet with no will of his own, Astan comes to terms with how much of a jerk he's been. Even knowing that no words can erase his actions, he still feels the need to apologize. But Xenos can't bear to see Astan humiliate himself like that. When Astan raises his head, it won't be because he's forgiven him, but because Xenos wants to land a solid punch before leaving. He's been wanting to do this for a long time, but hitting someone unconscious wouldn't have been satisfying. Now that Astan is conscious, Xenos no longer holds back. He activates a strength buff 10 times greater, and starts walking slowly toward Astan. Then he delivers the most satisfying punch of his life, and Astan immediately faints. A few hours later, when Astan wakes up, Christina is by his side. She tells him he had many problems and was lucky no one died. If it weren't for Xenos, he would have been in trouble with multiple homicide charges. Even so, she says he's still imprisoned for several other reasons. She also conveys a message from Xenos. While Astan was unconscious, Xenos took his sword, a very high-level weapon, and if he sells it, he can pay for the damages he caused. Additionally, Xenos asks Astan to look at his own hand. When he does, he finds a gold coin that Xenos left as compensation. With this, Xenos makes it clear that he never wants to hear about Astan again, nor even hear his name. Astan can only lower his head, devastated, now understanding that he deserved all of this. After everything that happened, Xenos is so exhausted that he can barely stand. Everyone is concerned and offers to help him, but he refuses, saying he knows they're all dead tired. Even so, the girls can't just let him go without care. After all, he's always been helping everyone, so it's only fair that he receives a little care in return. Meanwhile, at the clinic, Carmilla tells Lily everything. Then, when Xenos finally arrives, Lily goes to greet him and immediately asks if he would like some tea. Krishna has been working hard to discover who is behind the golem attack, but she still has not managed to gather much information. All she knows so far is that there is someone called the Guide who is extremely difficult to track. She tried to uncover his whereabouts, but found no solid lead. The place where Astan met this guide was already clean, leaving no trace behind. Zofia also searched for information in the underground guild. What she heard there is that this guide began showing up recently. Other than that, no one knows anything about him. In other words, interrogating the people there will not help much. Krishna decides she will classify the guide as a dangerous threat and will pursue him. But judging by how he hides his tracks, she believes it will be very difficult for him to appear again anytime soon. Zofia, however, believes the opposite. She thinks the guide will show up again, and soon, because people like him never truly disappear unless they are planning something big behind the scenes. And if that is true, they need to be prepared for whatever he is planning. Krishna tells Zofia to stop with those crazy theories, since there is no proof that the man will return. But Zofia immediately replies that Krishna was also making assumptions just a moment ago. Xenos interrupts the argument, tells the two of them to stop fighting, and asks why Krishna is sitting far away on the other side of the room, which only makes the conversation more difficult. Krishna answers that, even though she is grateful for Zofia's help the other day, her position as a royal knight prevents her from being seen speaking informally with a demihuman. Xenos realizes the argument is about to escalate and prefers to leave before it gets worse. He kicks everyone out of the clinic and tells them not to come back that day unless they are injured. After that, he tries to relax a bit at his desk, but then Lily, somewhat shy, approaches and says she had an idea. Knowing that Xenos is exhausted after using so much mana in the fight against the golem, she was about to suggest going to the hot springs so he could rest. But before she can finish, Zofia bursts through the doors and jumps ahead, asking if he would like to go with her to relax in a hot spring. Xenos thinks that changing his routine a bit would be good and agrees. Zofia leaves all excited. Soon after, Linga appears. She looks around to make sure no one else is there, and then discreetly asks whether Xenos would like to go with her to the hot spring. Xenos still thinks visiting the hot spring is a nice idea, but he cannot accept Linga's request since Zofia invited him first. But before he can say anything, Linga says she will wait for him at the hot spring and leaves. Moments later, Loa shows up, and before she even says a word, Xenos already knows exactly what she wants. As he expected, she is going to invite him to the hot spring as well, and since he already understood her intention, she takes it as a yes and says she will meet him there. Right after that, the exact same scene repeats with Krishna. This makes Xenos begin to wonder why suddenly everyone wants so badly to go to the hot springs. He then remembers that Lily was about to say something before they were interrupted, but she prefers to remain quiet because she does not want to admit that she was also going to invite him to the springs with her. Carmilla heard the whole situation and finds it hilarious that Lily gathered the courage only to be overshadowed by the others. Meanwhile, Xenos has no idea why she is laughing. In any case, Carmilla is almost certain that far more interesting things will happen at the hot spring, and since she has not visited one in a long time, she decides she will go as well. Later, Xenos is relaxing in the bath when Zofia suddenly appears. He reminds her that it is a men's bath, but Zofia says it is fine because she placed a sign on the door saying the place was closed, so no one will interrupt. In reality, Zofia went there ready to throw herself at Xenos, but decided not to overdo it and simply kept chatting while the two bathed. She mentions that people keep saying she changed after meeting Xenos, and he even agrees, saying she is far less aggressive than before. But at that moment, what bothers Xenos is that Zofia is getting far too close to him. Her idea was to make Xenos comfortable in the conversation so she could strike by surprise, but since she was caught, she ends up trying to force her way into sitting on his lap. That is when Linga appears and scolds Zofia for trying to get ahead and sneak into the men's bath to see Xenos divisao == 2. But, in truth, Linga is there for the same reason, so she pretends to feel sick just to try to fall into his arms, except Zofia doesn't let it slide and grabs Linga, starting a dispute to keep her away from Xenos. Meanwhile, Loa comes out of the water and says she also wants to join the chaos. Xenos asks what she is doing there and why she isn't using a towel. Loa explains that she was hiding, waiting for the right moment to be alone with him, and the reason she isn't wearing anything. She wanted to show Xenos her fully trained body, and even asks what he thinks. Xenos can barely see because the light is behind her, but that doesn't change how strange the whole situation is. He just stands still, hoping they will stop soon. Right after that, Krishna also appears and starts arguing with the others for making that mess in the men's bath. But the girls quickly respond, saying Krishna has no right to criticize anything, since she clearly also went there to be close to Xenos. Krishna tries to say that this is not exactly the point. The four start another commotion because of Xenos, but he is already losing his patience, so he ends up shouting for them to get out of there and return to the women's bath. The yelling is so loud that Yumin hears it from the women's bath and is shocked that there are girls shameless enough to invade the men's area. But she only hopes those crazy ones don't end up ruining her vacation. Soon after, the girls return to their bath, frustrated because Xenos didn't want anything with any of them. But now they seem to be getting along just fine. Yumin is even surprised, because it's not every day you see a human, a werewolf, an ogre, and a lizard chatting as if they were close friends. Sometime later, everyone leaves the hot spring and gathers to share a meal. Krishna is still unsure whether to admit she is part of the group or not, so she holds herself back from joining them. Later that night, Xenos sets Lily in bed and goes to the balcony to chat with Carmilla. She asks if he is enjoying the trip, and Xenos admits that dinner was actually fun, at least until people started drinking too much and trying to sit on his lap. Carmilla laughs and tells him to enjoy it while the fun is still mild, because she is almost certain things are going to get much more complicated for him soon. Xenos asks her to stop saying that before it brings bad luck, but it's already too late. A wraith's intuition rarely fails. Speaking of that, Xenos realizes wraiths cannot stay under the sun for long and wonders how Carmilla got there. She explains that it was simple. She only needed to possess the staff that was there and ask Lily to bring it. Since wraiths can only possess items they were connected to when alive, Xenos asks what she used to do back then. But Carmilla avoids the subject because she still doesn't like talking about the past, and she changes the topic by offering him a drink. The next morning, a massive explosion happens in the kitchen, and Yumin runs to see what happened. She finds one of the owners collapsed on the floor. The man had been preparing breakfast when the fire stones on the stove exploded, leaving him badly burned. Yumin, being a good healer, says she will help however she can, although she manages to stabilize his condition. She doesn't have enough technique to fully heal his arm. She says they need to take the man to the nearest royal hospital as soon as possible so he can receive the proper treatment. But even then, he probably won't be able to use the arm again. That's when Xenos shows up to understand what happened, and Yumin takes the chance to ask him for help to take the man to the hospital. But in Xenos' view, the man's injuries aren't even that serious, so he thinks taking him there is unnecessary. Since Xenos already had a ride arranged, he stands up and starts to walk away. But before leaving for good, as a way to thank them for the nice stay at the hot spring, Xenos decides to heal the man for free. After that, he leaves together with Lily. Yumin even thinks Xenos was an idiot, because in her mind he simply ignored an injured man and walked away without helping at all. But then she looks at the guy and notices the wounds have completely vanished. For a moment she even questions whether it might have been her own healing magic, but quickly realizes it wasn't, because she doesn't have the power to accomplish something so impressive. Only saints or top-tier healers could achieve such a feat. That is when she realizes that Xenos must be an exceptional healer. Immediately, Yumin returns to work to inform her boss about what happened. Bernardo is shocked to discover that an advanced healer is wandering around. The government would probably want this guy as a national resource, but the problem is managing to find Xenos, since all Yumin remembers about him is the black hair. Even so, Bernardo thinks there isn't much to worry about, because if Xenos had the kindness to heal a severely injured man without charging anything, he must be a good person, so there is no reason to interfere and he should be allowed to do whatever he wants. But then Yumin mentions that Xenos wore a black overcoat, and that ends up catching Bernardo's attention. Out of nowhere, he changes his mind and thinks it would be good to try to find this man. Yumin agrees, but asks how he plans to do that. Bernardo thinks for a moment and concludes that if there are no official records of Xenos, that means he does not have an official license, so he is definitely operating in the poorest parts of the city. And Bernardo already imagines the right way to reach him. Later, Zan appears dragging Bernardo to Xenos' clinic, saying he needed urgent help because he was feeling extremely sick. He had no idea who the man was. He only knew he was coughing a lot of blood and even fainted, so Zan brought him there. Xenos warns that the man might have a contagious disease, so he asks everyone to stay back until he finishes checking. From what Xenos can see, the man's lung is a complete disaster inside, and that makes him think of red lung disease. So he tells Lily to keep her distance. This disease killed many people in the past. It was extremely contagious, but theoretically it had been eliminated after the cure was created. Xenos does not understand how this man managed to catch it. At that moment, Bernardo stands up and is impressed by how quickly Xenos diagnosed the problem. He introduces himself as one of the healers from the Royal Hospital, although he is not very good at healing magic. Right after that, Yumin bursts into the clinic looking for Bernardo and starts scolding him because he did something so reckless just to find Xenos. But Bernardo says there was no other way if he wanted to speak with Xenos, although now he is really beginning to feel the effects of the disease. He takes a small vial from his pocket, drinks the contents, and explains that he took a drug to simulate the symptoms of red lung disease, just so he would be taken to Xenos. But he warns that everything is fine, because the antidote will begin to work soon. Xenos asks why he would have such a drug. Then Bernardo explains he created it while working on the cure for red lung some years ago. Xenos is shocked to hear that, because it means Bernardo is the famous doctor who developed the vaccine against red lung and earned the title of Fugue Healer because of it. Besides that, the reason Bernardo wanted so much to meet Xenos is that the description of his coat reminded him of an old friend. He asks Xenos where he got that coat, and Xenos says it belonged to his professor, but he does not know where his professor ended up. After that, Bernardo invites Xenos to work at the hospital, because there is a situation happening that needs help, and Xenos' help would be ideal. At that moment, the girls show up and hear that a strange man is dealing with Xenos, so they immediately get ready to hit him if he tries anything. But Bernardo assures them he does not want to force Xenos into anything. He only came to make an offer, and Xenos seems willing to accept. Zofia even asks him if he is sure, but Xenos thinks it is the best choice, since the hospital now knows about his hidden clinic, so it is better to gain Bernardo's support. Besides that, back when Red Lung was a problem, Bernardo dedicated himself to distributing the cure to people in the slums without charging anything, so Xenos feels he can trust him. Xenos goes to the hospital with Bernardo and Human, and Xenos is impressed by the size of the place. They reach Bernardo's office, and once Xenos settles, he explains the job. Several disappearances have been happening, and he wants Xenos to investigate what is going on. Xenos agrees, but warns that espionage is not his strong point, so he asks Bernardo if he is sure he wants to hire someone like him for that kind of mission. For this new work, Bernardo says that, as part of the Royal Hospital, Xenos will have access to several specialized programs, which should make it easier for him to gather the necessary information. Even so, Xenos is worried about drawing too much attention and having his identity exposed. But Bernardo reassures him by saying he has already invented a background story to cover for Xenos. So, from now on, if anyone asks, Xenos will say he was studying abroad and returned recently. Despite that, Xenos thinks this excuse will not be enough to fool the other healers, but Bernardo guarantees that, with an elite healer supporting him, no one will doubt it. For now, Human takes Xenos to the hospital dormitory, where he will stay for a while. When they arrive, to his surprise, Lily is already waiting. He immediately asks why she is there, and Human explains that Bernardo authorized her move. According to the dormitory rules, healers can live together with their close relatives or spouses, so Lily jokes that she has now become Xenos' wife, but in truth, Human registered Lily as Xenos' younger sister. It was Human's own idea to bring Lily, because she thought Xenos would feel more comfortable having someone familiar nearby, and, in reality, Xenos was worried about leaving Lily alone, so he is grateful for Human's consideration. After that, Human leaves Xenos so he can settle into the room. As soon as she leaves, Carmilla appears as well. Xenos understands why Lily is there, but he does not understand what brought Carmilla to the capital. In fact, Carmilla has no special reason. She just likes teasing Xenos, because something interesting always happens around him. Xenos asks if she realizes that, with so many healers nearby, one of them might end up exorcising her. But Carmilla does not care, because aside from Xenos, almost no one there would have enough strength to do that. Later, Xenos is in the hospital cafeteria with Human, and she wants to know how he is finding the new environment. Xenos says things are going fine, but that he will be overwhelmed for a while and still has no idea how he will manage to get an official license. Human says she can help, since she knows the ropes very well. She explains that the first step is to take an aptitude test. If you pass, you are accepted into the Royal Healing Academy. After studying hard for several years, then comes the test to obtain the official license. Xenos thinks all of this is extremely demanding, and is even surprised at how licensed healers manage to endure so much. And that is not even everything. After the license, you still have to pass another test if you want an adventurer license to work outside. The same applies if you want to work with the military, and there are still more exams for anyone who wants to rise in rank as a healer. Most people at the hospital are there to conduct research or deepen their studies. To Xenos, it seems like too much, so he asks Human to tell him what she knows about the disappearances. Human says that one of the people who vanished was Afreed, an advanced healer who worked there with research. He was very talented and kind, mainly in the medical field. From what Bernardo said, Afreed was a key figure in developing the cure for red lung disease. Xenos thinks Afreed must have been a truly good person, so it is worth trying to find out what happened to him. Since he still knows little about the case, he asks Human if there is any clue. At that moment, the cafeteria door opens and Goldrin walks in. Xenos asks who he is, and Human says he is the deputy director of the hospital and an advanced class Roman 7 healer. Xenos does not understand what that means, so Human explains, healers are divided into 3 types: beginner, advanced, and elite. Each type has 7 levels, and level Roman 7 in advanced is the maximum before becoming one of the elite. That shows how influential Goldrin is there. According to Human, he has his eyes on the director position, since the current director almost never shows up because of old age. That is why Goldrin is the one who commands things in practice. But ever since he took control, many things have changed, and Human thinks they changed for the worse. Now the wealthy receive first-class treatment, while the poor barely get a bandage and an ice pack To make things worse, Goldrin does not dedicate himself to improving as a healer, and people say he bought his way up to level Roman 7. Xenos has already figured out what kind of man he is and wants to keep his distance. But that will not be possible, because Human believes Goldrin may be connected to Afreed's disappearance. Since Goldrin wants to rise in rank quickly, he is constantly recruiting skilled people, and Afreed was one of the chosen ones. Xenos asks if Goldrin said anything about Afreed's disappearance, but Goldrin denied any involvement. Now Xenos knows what he needs to do, but he does not know how to get close to someone as important as Goldrin. Human says that will not be a problem if he shows his impressive abilities in one of the hospital's program. Goldrin will end up calling him. Xenos knows he is good at what he does, but he never had the chance to measure himself against other healers, so he does not know if he is at the right level. Even so, he decides to try. At that moment, one of Human's colleagues, Crescent, arrives asking why she is eating alone in the corner. Human replies she eats wherever she wants. Crescent does not understand the hint and thinks she is only acting coy. He ends up running into Xenos and quickly realizes that he is the special student who had been recommended by a renowned healer. This makes Crescent a little jealous, but he does not show it much and decides to leave, telling Xenos that he had better not bring shame to the name of his sponsor. Curious, Xenos asks Human what had happened there, and she explains that Crescent is one of his classmates and is actually a decent person. But after being discovered by Goldrin, his pride grew far too much. When he was younger, Xenos practiced magic on a body he had found in an alley, trying to revive the person. But before he could turn the body into a zombie, his future master appeared out of nowhere and slapped him on the head. The master explained that using magic on the dead was a waste, and that it would be far better for him to dedicate his powers to saving the living. Since then, Xenos' master decided to take him in and began teaching him everything about healing magic, together with another apprentice, Veritra. In just a single year, the two had already become first-rate healers, but the master made a point of warning them. They were not supposed to act arrogant, because being able to heal a few wounds only made them third-class healers. Back in the present, Xenos is in his first class at the new school, and the topic of the day is undead monsters. As the class progresses, Xenos is surprised, because even though he already knew all of this from his days as an adventurer, the way the content is taught in the classroom makes everything much easier for anyone who has never faced the undead. The teacher opens the floor for questions, and a student raises his hand asking about wraiths. The teacher admits that he does not have much information about them, only that they are the most dangerous among the undead. Almost no one has seen one and survived to tell the tale. Every adventurer party that encountered a wraith ended up dead, so the advice is, if you find one, run. And if the wraith is able to speak on top of that, run even more, because that shows how powerful it is. Xenos is shocked because he has exactly a speaking wraith resting at his house with Lily. He had no idea that Carmilla was that powerful, but he decides to stay quiet about it so he does not make anyone worry. Then the teacher asks if anyone there has ever faced undead. Crescent is the first to speak. He introduces himself, says that he once spent some time as an adventurer, and that he defeated around 30 ghosts. The entire class is impressed and starts applauding Crescent, and he loves the recognition. But he notices that Xenos is not clapping, so he decides to ask how many ghosts he has defeated. In truth, Xenos can defeat about 50 ghosts at the same time, but to avoid drawing too much attention, he chooses to say that he can handle 30. Crescent says he is lying, but Xenos confirms that he really can finish off 30 at once. The classroom is stunned when they understand that he is talking about defeating that amount in a single fight. Everyone asks him to tell how it happened, and Xenos explains that he once entered the underground labyrinth and that it was filled with ghosts. He kept casting heal until they all vanished. The students immediately realize that he is talking about a place that even gold-class adventurers hesitate to enter. So it is easy to imagine how impressed everyone becomes. Even so, Crescent keeps insisting that Xenos is making it up, because he refuses to accept that he might have done such a thing. In the next class, the topic is magic circles, and Crescent sits next to Xenos just to try to show off. Xenos never cared much about this, always thinking it was a waste of time, but he is still there attending. The teacher shows an example of a magic circle and asks someone to draw one on the board. Crescent volunteers immediately and poses as if he knows everything. He draws a perfect circle for a basic healing spell and receives praise from the teacher. Then Crescent says that Xenos also wants to draw a circle, even though Xenos had no intention of doing that, but now there is no way to avoid it, since he never bothered learning much about magic circles. He decides to draw one that his master had shown him a long time ago. Crescent starts laughing because Zenos' drawing looks nothing like the ones in the book. But when the teacher sees it, he is astonished because the circle goes beyond simple healing magic. It looks like a regeneration circle, but with something different. Zenos confirms that it is a regeneration circle, but says it is a strange type. If the patient has lost several fingers, the spell makes a random finger grow back. It is something far too complicated, and would consume much more mana than usual. But Zenos activates the circle without any trouble, although he thinks it is hardly worth it, because he can regenerate faster using his own method. The teacher sees that Zenos is a true genius and practically begs him to join the research laboratory. But Zenos politely refuses, and Crescent is dying of envy with all the attention he is receiving. Later, Goldrin hears that a new student full of talent has shown up. People comment that this student is capable of defeating 30 ghosts at once. But Goldrin says he has no time to listen to gossip. At that moment, another person enters and informs Goldrin that several undead were spotted in the cemetery. With that, Goldrin gets an idea. He decides to send Zenos on a mission to clear the cemetery, and if Zenos performs well, he will consider recruiting him. Later that night, Zenos departs together with the group responsible for exterminating the undead, and Crescent is also part of this group. Crescent takes the lead and commands the other students in the fight against the ghosts, but they end up surrounded quickly, and Crescent starts getting nervous. However, before the ghosts can do anything, Zenos releases an advanced healing spell and eliminates all of them. Zenos praises his classmates, saying that they helped a lot by attracting the ghosts, which allowed him to finish them off. But before he can finish speaking, Crescent is already taking credit for the powerful spell Zenos used. The other students, who did not understand what actually happened, believe Crescent when he says he was the one who saved the group. Crescent even tells them to run and tell the teachers how incredible he was. Then he approaches Zenos and shamelessly says that he will never acknowledge his abilities. But Zenos does not care at all about the credit Crescent stole. However, if Crescent really wants all the fame, he will have to endure it, because the problem with the undead is not over yet. Crescent has no idea what Zenos is talking about. But seconds later, the ground opens and a zombie king emerges. The other students are shocked to see a monster as strong as a zombie king appearing there. Even so, no one panics because they believe Crescent will handle it alone. And of course, no one has the courage to get close to that creature. Human and Zenos could do something, but they prefer to just observe so they do not interfere with Crescent. To be fair, Crescent does try to fight the zombie king. He casts the strongest healing spell he knows, but it barely affects the monster. He has absolutely no chance of defeating that thing, but his pride does not let him admit defeat, so he keeps running back and forth so he will not be crushed. Meanwhile, Human comments to Zenos that undead are usually attracted by more powerful undead creatures, so those ghosts from before probably appeared because of the zombie king. But Zenos thinks there is something more behind it. While they talk, Crescent starts getting badly beaten, and Zenos considers entering the fight. But Human asks him to wait a little longer. She still cares about Crescent, but she wants him to learn something from this situation. Crescent keeps holding on however he can, healing himself whenever he is thrown against the walls. But he ends up being caught by the zombie king and is about to be devoured. That is when Zenos decides to act. He prepares to cast one of his strongest spells, and when he finishes gathering the energy, he releases the Mega Heal. The zombie king is engulfed by bright lights as an enormous amount of healing magic burns its rotten flesh down to the bone. The monster is destroyed, and the mission comes to an end. But what Human said earlier about undead being attracted by more powerful creatures makes Zenos think. He realizes that the reason the ghosts and the zombie king appeared is because Carmilla is nearby. When he arrives home, he asks Carmilla if she has any idea about this increase in undead encounters, and Carmilla, very honestly, says she had no idea she was attracting these creatures. She asks if Zenos is going to send her away because of that. Zenos thinks carefully, and after considering the impact Carmilla has on the environment, he decides that the best thing is to keep her by his side to keep everyone safe. Carmilla becomes nervous when she hears that because it is the first time in her undead life that someone says they want her close, so she promises to stay by Zenos' side, but warns him that she will continue teasing him whenever she can. The next day, Crescent goes to meet his supervisor, who wants to congratulate him for the excellent work in the exorcism. According to the reports from the other students, Crescent did everything alone with a huge spell. But Crescent knows the truth. It was Xenos who saved everyone, since Crescent ended up receiving all the credit. The supervisor comments that this means Xenos is probably not as amazing as everyone has been saying. Crescent could simply step aside and continue receiving the praise he got for something Xenos did, but he begins to feel guilty. So he decides to come clean and confesses that he was not the one who defeated the monsters. He explains that it was Xenos who handled the undead and the zombie king, and that he himself witnessed everything. After that, Crescent leaves the supervisor's office, upset because he just lost a large part of his credibility by admitting that he took credit for someone else's achievement. But deep down he feels he did the right thing, since Xenos saved his life, and now, with the truth revealed, he believes that Xenos will be accepted into the research laboratory. For him, now the two of them are even. Sometime later, Bernardo shows up full of excitement and tells Xenos that Goldrin's research laboratory is after him, which means he will probably be invited to join the faction. Xenos thinks that is great, but he is surprised because he thought Crescent had kept all the credit for everything that happened during the undead exorcism. Either way, he is pleased to have overcome the first stage in the investigation about Goldrin. But Bernardo warns him that the work is only beginning, because Xenos will still go through an interview with the professor. Xenos questions the reason for so many steps just to join a research group. Bernardo explains that since Goldrin has a lot of prestige, he is very selective about who he allows into his circle. Then Xenos ends up asking why Goldrin has so much influence, since, being only an advanced healer, theoretically Bernardo, who is an elite healer, should have more authority. Bernardo answers that the title does not necessarily represent a person's power, especially in his case, because the recognition came from the medicines he created. Xenos does not fully understand the entire political situation, but decides he will attend the meeting with Goldrin, and the others wish him good luck. When Xenos arrives in the meeting room, after Goldrin finishes his introduction, the first thing he wants to know is what Xenos is capable of doing. He answers that he is a healer, so his work is simply to heal others. But Goldrin says that is not enough. Anyone with that gift can heal someone, but someone with Xenos' level of skill should have greater ambition. He says that healers are very powerful in the country, and, in fact, it can be said that this place only exists because of them. But the ones who truly benefit from the healer's work are the elite. For that reason, Goldrin wants to be part of that elite, not because he cares about the well-being of everyone, but because he wants to secure his own position and take advantage as well. In his mind, a person's value depends on what they can offer, so he does not even consider helping the poor. After the speech, Goldrin asks Xenos to draw the magic circle he had shown in class, because he wants to evaluate his abilities more precisely. Xenos does not really understand what the drawing will prove, but he does it exactly as requested. When he analyzes the circle, he stands up and says that Xenos is approved and can start in the laboratory the next day. On the following day, Xenos walks through the corridors and soon sees the members of Goldrin's research laboratory passing by him. From a distance, he spots Crescent, who calls for him to hurry and get in line. Crescent welcomes him with a smile and immediately warns that, since he arrived first, Xenos must respect him as a veteran of the team. After all, it was because of his recommendation that Xenos is there now. Xenos takes the opportunity to ask why Crescent decided to tell the truth, since it would have been much easier to keep the lie and protect his own image. Crescent says it was mostly because of guilt, but also because he realized that he could benefit from Xenos' success if he entered the laboratory. Xenos actually appreciates the honesty in admitting that, but then he wants to understand why everyone is standing in that line. Crescent explains that this is part of Goldrin's routine, who visits patients every day. Xenos asks if so many people are really necessary for that, but Crescent explains that the focus is to make a good impression, since Goldrin only treats people with important positions. Xenos is there because he wants to investigate Goldrin, but from the back of the line that will not happen, so he decides to run to the front. When the patient tells Goldrin that his foot has been hurting since the previous day, he examines it and sees that it is only a mild sprain. Then he says he will need 3 of his subordinates to assist with the healing. Xenos does not really understand what he means, but he soon sees him cast the spell and draw energy from 3 students. With that energy, he heals the patient's ankle, but it is clear that this affected the students from whom he drained the energy. Xenos runs back to Crescent and asks if he understands the magic that Goldrin just used. Crescent explains that his specialty is health transfer magic. It is a type of spell that transfers a person's vital force to someone else and allows serious wounds to be healed. even if the mage is not that powerful. For example, it is possible to pass someone's vital force to another injured person and help with recovery. But the more severe the injury is, the more vital force is required. That is why the energy is usually divided among several people, and the side effects are generally just a bit of fatigue. Xenos finds this interesting and understands better why Goldrin wants to maintain that method. But Crescent says that this is not all. There are rumors that Shalbard, who is the current director, will retire soon. And because of that, Goldrin is trying to secure voting support for the next election. Xenos thanks Crescent for giving all the answers like that. While talking, he takes the chance to ask if Crescent has anything to say about the matter and whether he has ever heard the name of someone called Afreed. Crescent confirms that he knows Afreed, but says he never liked him. This man was even invited to one of Goldrin's dinners and, after that, vanished from the map. Xenos wants to understand what he meant by that dinner. Then Crescent explains that Goldrin usually organizes dinners for his favorite subordinates, and being invited to one of those meetings is like a great privilege. But Afreed disappeared right after attending one of those parties, and, since then, no one has ever heard from him again. Later, Xenos tells the whole story to Bernardo, who even thinks they might already have enough material to close the investigation. But Bernardo warns that this is far from the end. That information only shows that Goldrin might have some connection to Afreed's disappearance, but it still proves nothing against him. That is why Bernardo wants Xenos to gain Goldrin's trust and manage to enter one of those dinners to discover what really happened. He even promises to pay Xenos more if he accepts that mission. Xenos, who only wanted to go back home, ends up accepting to continue and move forward with the investigation. But he warns that when all this is over, he wants Bernardo to tell him everything he knows about his master. Meanwhile, in the slums, Linga forces the lock of Xenos' clinic until she manages to open the door. The reason? She wants to deal with the mess in the place while Xenos is not around. But since she entered, she takes the opportunity to snoop and take a look at his thing. But suddenly, Linga feels that someone else is in the place and immediately gets ready for whatever may come. To her surprise, the one who is there is Zofia. The two stare at each other and ask what the other is doing there. Then Linga notices that Zofia also has a mop, meaning she had the same idea. Right after, Lo also shows up, breaking down the door because she wanted to help clean Xenos' clinic. But Zofia and Linga already imagined that this would happen. The problem is that they would have preferred if Lo had entered in a different way, because now they will have more work fixing the damage to the door. The next day, in the capital, Xenos meets Crescent, who informs him that he will have the great chance to take care of Goldrin's pet dog. In truth, Crescent only wanted to pass that responsibility to someone else. Xenos even finds it strange that Crescent is part of the research team if that is the kind of task he is handling. Crescent explains that Goldrin is busy in meetings with 7 important nobles whose support he wants, and because of that, the task of watching the dog falls on them. But Crescent does not mind, because he believes that by doing those tasks, he will be able to rise within the faction. Xenos asks if Crescent truly believes that this will earn him a promotion, and Crescent confirms it. That is the only reason he is making an effort. If he can rise in rank, he will be able to enter the nation's elite and have everything of the best. Xenos becomes somewhat unsure, because he thought the main reason for people becoming healers was to help others, and it would even make sense to think that way. But Crescent says that things in practice are different. He even says that, in the past, he dreamed of curing diseases and saving lives, but his healing magic does not have that much power, and that greatly limits what he can do. Since he cannot save everyone, he decided to use what he has to accumulate wealth. At that moment, Bonds appears and provokes Crescent, asking if he is stuck taking care of Goldrin's dog again. Crescent replies that he is only doing what he needs to, but Bonds warns that flattering Goldrin alone will not take him far. After that, Bonds leaves, and Xenos asks who that man was. Crescent says that Bonds is Goldrin's first secretary, but Xenos finds it strange that someone so irresponsible holds a position like that. Crescent understands the surprise, but explains that Bonds is an old friend of Goldrin and only got the position because he is close to him, since he barely works at all. At that moment, Bonds shouts Crescent's name and seems to have heard what he said, because he throws a bottle in his direction. Luckily, Bonds was so drunk that he missed the target, but the bottle fell near Madame Milk, who was so startled that she ran away. Crescent panics because he knows Goldrin would destroy him if Milk went missing. He runs after her, but Milk ends up going into the street and gets hit by a carriage. Crescent arrives running and tries to use a more advanced healing spell, but he cannot restore the dog's body the way he needed. Xenos says that Crescent can calm down because Milk's hemorrhage has been stopped, and she should survive. But Crescent says that this is not enough. If she is left with scars, Goldrin will be angry because he only likes Milk because she is pretty, and then Crescent will be doomed. Xenos, wanting to keep Crescent from getting into trouble, raises his hand and begins to heal Milk. Crescent tries to warn him that this would be useless, because regenerating skin requires enormous physical preparation, and even he himself needed the help of another healer for that. But while Crescent was talking, Xenos had already finished the job and Milk was good as new. No sign of injury, and he even managed to fix her ribs. Still, Xenos recommends they let Milk rest for the day. Later, Xenos gets home and finds Yumin waiting for him. He asks if something happened, but she says she only stopped by to invite him to take a walk with her. Xenos is even a little surprised by the request, but ends up accepting. When the two are in the forest, he takes the chance to ask Yumin if there is something she would like to tell him. She looks at Xenos and says she wanted to apologize, because if she were not so weak, she would have managed to attract Goldrin's attention. And with that, Xenos would not have gotten involved in all this trouble. Xenos quickly answers that she has no reason to apologize, since Bernardo is already rewarding him for his efforts. Besides that, if not for this opportunity, he would never have been able to set foot in the royal hospital and would not have had the chance to discover more about his master. Deep down, he only has things to gain from all this, and he reinforces to Yumin that she does not need to feel bad. Yumin feels relieved to hear that, but now that Xenos mentioned the master, she realizes she knows very little about this person he talks about so much. So she decides to ask what kind of person that master was. Xenos admits that he does not know for sure, because to tell the truth, his master was a very mysterious man, but he was the one who taught him to read and write, besides passing on a lot of knowledge about healing magic and about the world itself. That is why Xenos feels that he practically owes his entire life to his master. Yumin says that this sounds very similar to what happened between her and Bernardo. When she decided to become a healer, he took her in and taught her many things related to his research. It is true that Bernardo's dedication to his work made his girlfriend leave him, so since then Yumin has been taking care of him. This sounds a bit strange to Xenos, so he asks Yumin what kind of relationship she has with Bernardo. She says that Bernardo is her uncle, and that is why they have such a strong bond. Right after that, while Xenos and Yumin are returning to the royal hospital, Crescent appears running toward them. He kneels in front of Xenos and begins to beg for help, because he ended up getting into a complicated situation, and by the look on Crescent's face, Xenos realizes that the problem is serious. Meanwhile, Goldrin returns to his office after having lunch with Lord Fennel. His assistant receives him, but notices that Goldrin seems worried about something. He then asks if anything went wrong during the lunch. Goldrin says no, that nothing bad happened. But during the conversation, Fennel mentioned that his daughter has a strange irritation on her face and asked if Goldrin could help. Goldrin thinks for a moment and concludes that it must be the famous strange face disease. This condition is not dangerous and should disappear on its own after some time. The problem is that if Fennel's daughter wants to get rid of it immediately, it will be necessary to remove the affected area. But that would leave a huge mark, and she would certainly not like that at all. He could even try to regenerate the skin using donors for the magical health transfers and avoid scars. But Fennel's daughter is so ashamed of her face that she does not accept being seen by many people. The most Goldrin could take would be 1 or 2 assistants. And barely that, because she does not like the idea at all. All of this is making Fennel very nervous, so he decides to go check on his dog, Milk, to try to calm down. But on the way to Milk's room, he runs into Bonds, who jokes saying that Milk was run over by a carriage the other day. Goldrin immediately becomes furious, thinking Bonds is involved. But Bonds asks him to relax and explains that the dog sitter who was with Milk already treated her, and that she is fine. So Goldrin decides to leave Bonds alone for now and runs to see Milk. To his surprise, Milk is actually fine. She only looks a little tired, but she has no injuries and shows no sign of the scare from the accident. Goldrin can hardly believe that there really is a mage capable of healing someone without leaving a single scar, since he left Crescent in charge of Milk. He believes it was Crescent who did that, and that is where Crescent's drama begins. Goldrin asked him to treat Lord Fennel's daughter, but he does not know how to handle the case. Crescent tells Xenos that Fennel's daughter has strange face disease, but Xenos does not understand the panic, since this condition is harmless and disappears on its own after some time. Crescent knows that, but Fennel's daughter refuses to attend any event with her face like that. So a quick solution needs to be found. Xenos suggests removing the diseased area, but Crescent explains that the roots are so deep that this would leave a horrible scar on her face, and if he ends up disfiguring the daughter of one of the 7 most powerful nobles, he will be finished. Human asks why Goldrin gave Crescent such a difficult task, so Crescent explains that Goldrin heard about Milk's case and believes that it was Crescent who healed the dog. Human suggests that he simply tell the truth and say that it was Xenos who took care of Milk, but Crescent is afraid that, by admitting he took Xenos' credit again, Goldrin will fire him for good. That is why he is begging Xenos for help so the procedure will work. At that moment, Lily appears bringing tea for everyone and introduces herself as Xenos' younger sister. Crescent is shocked, because he had no idea that Xenos had such a cute little sister. Lily loves being called adorable, but explains to Crescent that she already belongs to Xenos, so she could not stay with him no matter how many compliments he gives. Of course, that is not what Crescent meant when he praised her, so he tries to cover it up by saying that, since he and Xenos are so close, he already considers Lily his little sister as well. But Xenos never agreed with that story of them being siblings. The next day, Goldrin takes Crescent to Fennel's estate, and Crescent calls Xenos to go along. But when Fennel finally appears to welcome them, he is already very nervous and warns Goldrin that the situation has become more complicated than he expected. His daughter, Charlotte, is now refusing to accept any surgery. Charlotte says she does not want to risk having her pretty face marked. Even so, Fennel trusts blindly that Goldrin will manage to treat her without leaving a single scar, so he asks him to try convincing his daughter to change her mind. Goldrin agrees immediately, and they all go to Charlotte's room to try talking. Fennel is the first to speak. He tells his daughter that he believes her face will be perfect if she allows them to perform the surgery, and that she can trust him because he never lied to her. But Charlotte throws in his face that time when he promised her a Firefox fur scarf for her birthday and ended up giving her nothing. That was not even Fennel's fault, but he knows that, in the end, he failed to keep his promise, so he is embarrassed. With nothing left to say to change her mind, Goldrin decides to try his luck. He goes to the door, introduces himself as a professor from the Royal Hospital, and guarantees that she can trust him to make the surgery work. But Charlotte remains suspicious and says she does not want the surgery because she thinks Goldrin may have been paid by someone to leave her face full of marks. While Goldrin and Fennel insist on trying to convince Charlotte that the surgery is safe, Crescent starts fantasizing that, if he manages to make her face perfect, she will fall in love with him. Xenos does not even waste time trying to explain why that makes no sense. Even so, Crescent asks Fennel to let him try talking to Charlotte and introduces himself as Goldrin's assistant. But Charlotte shuts him down immediately, saying that his voice is irritating and that she does not want a mere assistant talking to her. Since no one can convince Charlotte, Goldrin asks Xenos to try. Then Xenos decides to give his best. He approaches the door, introduces himself as an assistant, and Charlotte is already ready to dismiss him. But before she can say anything, Xenos interrupts, saying he only wants to talk about the surgery. He explains that it is perfectly fine if she does not want to go through with the procedure, because anyone would be afraid of having their face opened. He also says that the strange face disease is not something that puts her life at risk. The worst that could happen is that she ends up with a huge wart on the side of her face, looking like a strange old woman. After saying that, Xenos already turns to leave, but Charlotte asks him to wait, because the idea of ending up with an old lady's wart on her face terrifies her, so she agrees to let everyone enter the room and asks if what Xenos said is true. Crescent even tries to say something, but Charlotte immediately tells him to shut up because his voice still irritates her. Then Goldrin explains that, in other cases of the strange face disease, after a month, spots and warts appear on the face like the face of an elderly woman. Charlotte becomes frightened just imagining that and asks Goldrin if there is any way to prevent those marks. Goldrin answers that, unfortunately, they can only be avoided by performing the surgery. Even so, Charlotte continues to fear that the procedure might go wrong. Fennel tries to argue that if she does nothing, the mark will grow more and more, so it would be better to trust Goldrin to fix it. She even asks if he can guarantee that nothing will go wrong, but Goldrin says he cannot promise that, since he himself will not be the one performing the surgery. Because of that, Charlotte runs off and says that as long as no one guarantees the total success of the surgery, she will not agree. Later, Xenos finds Charlotte sitting on the balcony of her room. She seems to adore birds, because there are many there, but Zenos quickly notices that one of the little birds is injured. Charlotte says she found the creature in the garden, and with that wound, it will never fly again. She says she feels like the bird. With her face in that state, she no longer goes to parties, no longer dances as before, and soon everyone will forget she exists. Zenos asks if she truly wants to get better, and Charlotte yells that of course she does. But she does not want to end up covered in scars, so she asks them to stop talking about the subject. But while she complains, Zenos has already healed the bird's wing, and the little creature is already flying as if nothing had happened. Charlotte is shocked to see that he managed to heal the bird so easily, but Zenos says he can do the same for her. Because regardless of whether a person is a noble or a peasant, if someone needs help, Zenos will do everything he can. That is his duty as a healer. Zenos' words end up convincing Charlotte that he knows what he is doing, so she decides to trust him and accepts the surgery. After Charlotte is sedated, Fennel leaves and asks Goldrin to take care of her. But Goldrin will not touch anything, because he already passed the responsibility to Zenos and Crescent. Yet he still wants to keep the credit afterward, so he warns Crescent not to mess up. Zenos notices that Crescent is nervous and offers to let him leave everything in his hands. Crescent thanks him but asks if Zenos has ever done a surgery of this kind before. Technically, he has, but when he was a child. Even so, he has more experience than Crescent. When Zenos is about to take command, Goldrin appears and says that the one who needs to perform the surgery is Crescent, so Zenos ends up forced to act as the assistant. Crescent, visibly nervous, picks up the scalpel and tries to begin the procedure, but his hands will not stop shaking. He had already studied this type of operation at the hospital and tries to follow what he learned from the books, but Zenos asks him to wait while he performs an analysis on the body. Crescent does not understand what Zenos just did, so Zenos explains that he took a careful look at Charlotte's body and now knows exactly where all the wart roots are. That way, Crescent does not need to start cutting without direction. The operation proceeds smoothly thanks to Zenos' guidance. But when Crescent is almost removing the last root, he notices something frightening. This root is attached to Charlotte's facial nerves, and to cut it, he would have to damage her nerves, which would end up altering the girl's face. Since repairing nerves is extremely complicated, Crescent suggests ending the surgery for now and transferring Charlotte to the Royal Hospital, where she could receive the correct treatment. But Goldrin is only worried about his reputation. He had promised Fennel that he would fix Charlotte's growths, but now, to do that, he would need to cut her nerves and interfere with the girl's face. A real doctor would have listened to what Crescent said and would have prioritized the patient's well-being. But Goldrin is a traitor. He grabs Crescent's arm and forces him to cut the final root along with Charlotte's facial nerve. Right after that, he starts shouting as if Crescent had made that decision on his own. Crescent is so shocked that he cannot say anything. Fennel comes running as soon as he hears Goldrin's screams, and Goldrin says loudly that his idiotic assistant, Crescent, has just cut Charlotte's nerves, and that now her face will be marked forever. An accusation like that could destroy Crescent's life, and Goldrin does not care at all. But Zenos refuses to stand still in that situation, especially because Charlotte had asked him for help directly. He speaks loudly to Fennel and says that Goldrin is exaggerating, that a cut nerve is not a reason to panic. Then he says he is tired of doing nothing, walks past Goldrin, picks up the scalpel, and finishes the work, removing the root. After that, he uses his healing magic and restores Charlotte's nerves perfectly. A few hours later, Charlotte wakes up in her room, and her father feels relieved to see her awake. But before any hug, she wants to check her face. She grabs a mirror, and when she looks at herself, she cannot hold back her tears when she sees that her face is normal. Goldrin ended up with all the fame for the surgery, so Fennel believes that he was the one who saved his daughter. Goldrin also said that he had to leave right after the procedure because he had matters related to the hospital election to handle, and Fennel promised to support him as a way to thank him. But Charlotte begins to suspect that Goldrin might not be as good as he seems. She remembers hearing, during the surgery, Zenos' voice saying that everything would be fine, so she is certain that he was the true one responsible for saving her, and she will be eternally grateful for that. Later, Zenos is helping Human carry several bottles from Ernardo's laboratory, and she explains that they are some of the last formulas prepared by Ernardo, but she does not even know what they are for. Meanwhile, Crescent arrives in a hurry, bringing news. He and Zenos have been invited to a private dinner hosted by Goldrin. That sounds great, but Human quickly notices that Crescent is not as happy as he says. He even claims he is excited, but deep down he is a little worried about getting involved with Goldrin after what happened. Even so, he believes this could guarantee a good promotion and decides to go. Since the dinner is already happening that night, Crescent arranges to meet Xenos in the lobby. Goldrin's reception begins quickly, and the guests are seated while he explains that he secured Lord Fennel's support, and now it is practically certain that he will become the new director of the Royal Hospital by the end of the month. Everyone celebrates Goldrin, and despite his initial doubts, Crescent is excited to be there, since it is a good opportunity to make connections with the important figures who were invited. While Crescent focuses on that, Xenos takes the chance to try gathering information about Afreed and discovers that at the last dinner Afreed was taking care of Bonds. Xenos goes to Bonds and asks if he remembers meeting someone called Afreed at the previous dinner. Bonds does remember, because while everyone was distracted socializing, Afreed took the trouble of bringing him a glass of water. Bonds thought Afreed was a rather strange guy, but he liked the boy. He was the only one who showed any attention to him at the event, since Goldrin always tells the students that Bonds is a liar and that they should avoid contact. Xenos finds it strange that Goldrin says such things when he himself was the one who gave Bonds the position of first secretary. Lily asks Bonds why Goldrin gave him such a good position if he does nothing, and Bonds answers that it is because he and Goldrin are old friends. But when she asks how they met, Bonds gets irritated and tells her to leave him alone, because he does not remember. Xenos decides not to insist, because Bonds is far too drunk to provide useful information. But Lily believes that Bonds knows some dirty secret about Goldrin, so she asks the waiter for a few bottles of wine because she plans to get Bonds drunk enough to reveal every secret he knows about Goldrin. Lily spends the rest of the party praising Bonds and encouraging him to talk about himself, while she keeps filling his glass non-stop. Bonds is completely drunk, exactly as Lily planned. Although everything seems to be going smoothly, Xenos becomes uneasy, trying to understand how such an innocent girl managed to come up with an idea like that. Lily reveals that she learned that trick from Carmilla, and that bothers Xenos, because he does not like seeing Carmilla filling Lily's head with mischievous ideas. But this time it ended up helping, so he turns to Bonds and asks if he has any clue about what happened to Afreed after the last party where they met. Bonds, already almost passed out from drinking so much, answers that he remembers Afreed taking him outside to get some fresh air. Then Xenos decides to repeat the scenario. He thinks that by recreating that situation, Bonds might end up saying something important, so he helps take Bonds outside. On the way, Bonds stumbles and drops the wine bottle on the ground. Instead of getting annoyed, he starts laughing and talking about old memories. He seems to confuse Xenos with Goldrin, which makes him recall the day everything changed 13 years ago. Xenos decides to play along to try extracting more information and pretends to be Goldrin, encouraging Bonds to keep telling the story. Bonds talks about a time when Goldrin was a researcher who could no longer progress in his studies, until one day an explosion completely changed his life. After that, with Lord Fennel's support, Goldrin became a professor at the Royal Hospital and now managed to infiltrate himself to try taking the director's position. Right after that, Bonds collapses there on the floor, and Xenos feels frustrated because he sensed he was very close to discovering something truly important. But since Bonds is asleep, there is nothing more he can do. He tells Lily that he will leave Bonds under someone's care, and after that they will be able to take a break. Lily asks if they have already completed the mission of gathering information, but Xenos feels that a big piece is still missing in this puzzle. That is when Carmilla appears from behind the sofa, leaving Xenos surprised to see her there, even more in a place full of healers. But Carmilla says that enjoying herself in dangerous situations is much more exciting. In any case, she heard almost everything Bonds said and believes she can help understand what is really happening. Meanwhile, in the slums, Zofia and the rest of the group begin to feel down because Xenos has been gone for a long time. Normally they would be arguing about who has the right to be there, but without Xenos, there is no reason to fight. Then one of Zofia's men arrives in a panic, warning that a huge accident happened. While Zond and the others were working on the construction, a pillar collapsed and pierced Zond right through the stomach. The man who arrives to warn them is covered in blood, and Zofia realizes immediately that the situation is serious. But Xenos still has not returned, and Zond will not survive if they sit around waiting. Linda suggests that they go get Zond and bring him to Xenos as fast as possible. But Zofia reminds them that Xenos is infiltrated in the Royal Hospital, and if they go there, his disguise may be ruined. Even so, Linga and Lo are certain that Xenos would be far more devastated if he learned that someone died because he was not around. Meanwhile, in the royal hospital, Carmilla shares with Xenos and Lily a rumor she heard while walking around the place. They say that 13 years ago a massive explosion happened and struck Lord Fennel. But even with the severity of the incident, Fennel came out without a scratch, and, since that day, owed a favor to Goldrin. When people hear of a noble indebted to a healer after a disaster, the idea that comes to mind is that the healer saved his life. But considering the level of destruction the explosion caused, one would expect that Fennel had been severely injured, probably needing a complete body restoration. Xenos comments that this type of restoration is not that difficult as long as the person's heart is still beating. For someone like him, it would be possible, but Goldrin definitely would not be able to do it. So Lily raises the possibility that another healer was the one who saved Fennel after the explosion. But before Fennel regained consciousness, that healer stepped away, and Goldrin took the chance to claim the credit and use Fennel to rise in his career inside the hospital. She also believes that Bonds witnessed everything and has been using that to blackmail Goldrin, and that during the last party, when Afreed was helping Bonds, he must have accidentally heard the truth, which made Afreed disappear in fear that Goldrin would try to do something against him. That is when Crescent appears, saying he had been looking for Lily everywhere. He says that he met important people and wanted to introduce them to her. Lily answers that she does not care about politics and that she would rather stay with Xenos, but since Crescent insists, she agrees to go for now. When Lily leaves, Carmilla asks Xenos if he has considered another theory about the explosion. What Lily said makes a lot of sense, but the way Carmilla mentioned the explosion, it is impossible to believe that only Fennel was hit. Many people were caught in the explosion, but only Fennel, who was precisely the noble Goldrin needed, survived. If this is combined with Goldrin's knowledge of the health transfer technique, everything indicates that he transferred the vital force of all the victims to Fennel. In other words, he sacrificed dozens of lives to save only one. According to the kingdom's laws, this would not even be considered a very serious crime. But Xenos does not accept that kind of sacrifice, and, considering what happened, it is possible that Afreed discovered the truth that day and vanished because of it. Carmilla wants to know what Xenos intends to do with everything he uncovered. He answers that he only plans to pass the information to Bernardo and continue with his life, since he is not the one who should judge anyone for that. Xenos stands up to leave, but when he returns to the party, he notices that everyone is staring toward the outer area. He asks Crescent the reason for the commotion, and Crescent says that a disturbance broke out at the main gate. Xenos looks and sees humans standing there. The guards are blocking her entrance and saying nobody enters without being invited by Goldrin, but Human insists that it is urgent and she needs to speak to her friend immediately. Then Loa sees Xenos in the crowd and shouts his name, which makes Zofia scold her for making so much noise, since they had agreed not to draw attention and to maintain Xenos' disguise. Loa even apologizes, but Zahn's condition is becoming critical, and they cannot waste any more time. When Goldrin hears the noise, he immediately wants to know why some filthy demi-humans are trying to enter his mansion and orders the guards to drive them all out. But before they can do anything, Linga quickly takes the guards down, and Lo enters with the unconscious Zond in her arms. She calls for Xenos, saying it is a life or death case. The people at the party begin whispering when they hear Xenos' name, asking if it is true that he associates with demi-humans. Xenos does not care about that and asks what happened. Lo explains that Zond suffered a serious accident at a construction site and that they went to the dormitories in the royal hospital to look for Xenos, but ended up running into Human. She was the one who explained where Xenos was. Goldrin goes up to Xenos and wants to know what he has to do with those demi-humans. Xenos ignores him and tells the others that he will help. Goldrin warns that if he does that, he will be throwing away any chance of joining his team. But Xenos does not care. To him, being a healer means helping whoever needs help. He says goodbye to Crescent and tells Lily that it is time to leave. Xenos grabs her and jumps over the railing to the lower floor. Crescent sees Xenos going away and cannot understand how he had the courage to abandon such a brilliant future as a healer. Goldrin approaches Crescent and tells him not to even think about following the same path, now that Xenos has gone against him. Goldrin promises to destroy any chance Xenos might have of continuing his career in the hospital. Crescent even thinks Xenos acted impulsively, but he remembers how Xenos was always willing to help anyone, no matter who it was. As for Goldrin, he knows he would do anything for more power, even betray allies. So Crescent decides to act like Xenos and also jumps from the balcony to help. But when he finally gets close, Xenos had already finished treating Zond and no longer needed help. Human calls Crescent an idiot for throwing his future away for nothing. but she admits she heard what he said earlier, and that, for the first time, he said something worthy. In the end, she even feels proud to be his friend, although she still thinks he is annoying. The next day, Xenos goes to Bernardo and tells him everything about Goldrin's vile scheme. Bernardo remembers that Afreed mentioned being injured in an accident when he was a child, and deduces that he must have survived that disaster. And, since everything indicates that Goldrin caused the explosion, Bernardo believes that Afreed might attempt some kind of revenge during the celebration honoring Goldrin for becoming director. Bernardo says he will have to appear at the party for safety, but for now, he thanks Xenos greatly for the information. Since Xenos' work there is finished, he is already free to go. Xenos asks if he is sure, and Bernardo confirms. All that is left is preparing the documents for Xenos' trip, and when they are ready, he will reveal everything about Xenos' master. Until then, Human suggests they have a small farewell party. At night, everyone gathers in Xenos' room, and Crescent is already drinking heavily, depressed because he does not know what his life will be like without his friend. Human and Lily think he is dramatic, but it is useless to say anything. Xenos tries to cheer him up, saying that he will manage to get by anywhere. Crescent is even moved to see that Xenos is not teasing him, but that does not improve his mood. Now he even thinks he is seeing things, because he swears there is a ghost spying from behind the wall. The next day, Xenos and Lily say their goodbyes, ready to depart. Before they leave, Human hands over a letter from Bernardo with information about Xenos' master. However, when they arrive at Bernardo's office, they find something strange on his desk. Meanwhile, Bernardo had already taken everyone down at Goldrin's party. Until that moment, everything seemed perfect during the celebration. Fennel still felt indebted to him, and everyone there planned to vote for him in the election. Goldrin was closer than ever to his goal. All of this began 13 years earlier, when Goldrin accidentally triggered an explosion because of an experiment. At the time, several people were injured on the street, but Goldrin only wanted to get out of there and pretend he had nothing to do with it. But then he saw a noble among the wounded, and thought that if he saved that man, he could rise in life. So he decided to drain the vital force of all the others and transfer it to Fennel, so that Fennel would remain indebted to him. While he was doing that, Goldrin was so confident in his clever plan that he did not even notice Bonds approaching. Bonds managed to take a picture of him in the act. To make sure Bonds would not expose him, Goldrin had to promise to appoint him as his first secretary and pay him a salary even if he did nothing. Once Goldrin bought Bonds' silence, everything started to work out for him. Shortly afterward, Bernardo approached Goldrin, and Goldrin assumed he came because he was interested in gaining some kind of advantage, since Goldrin would soon become the hospital's new director. Goldrin remembered hearing that Bernardo was the one who brought Xenos to work at the hospital, so Goldrin decided to vent to Bernardo and commented that Xenos was a complete fool. Bernardo asked if Xenos had done something to anger Goldrin, and Goldrin answered by saying that, although Xenos was a good healer, he had the audacity the previous night to treat a demi-human. In Goldrin's view, the lives of demi-humans and poor people have no value, and therefore they must die serving nobles like him. Hearing that from Goldrin was the breaking point for Bernardo. In Bernardo's office, Xenos and Human have just found the image of Goldrin stealing vitality from others to save Fennel. They immediately realize that it was from the case 13 years ago. And when Human thinks more carefully, she remembers that after Xenos told everything to Bernardo yesterday, he left in a hurry, saying he needed to speak with Bonds. Human examines the image more closely and sees a younger Afreed, injured in the background, proving that he survived the incident. In addition, Human notices something even more striking, a woman in the background who seems very familiar to her. At the party, Goldrin regains consciousness and sees that everyone around him is passed out. Bernardo approaches and informs Goldrin that he and the others were poisoned. Bernardo, besides being a great doctor, knows how to prepare powerful poison. As soon as he arrived, he put poison into everyone's wine. This poison makes people lose consciousness and gradually drains their strength until they die. Anyone who is not treated will die in about 10 minutes. Goldrin received a smaller dose, so he has about 15 minutes left. Desperate, Goldrin asks the reason for all of this. Bernardo responds that he is recreating what happened 13 years ago. Goldrin cannot believe Bernardo knows about that, but Bernardo had suspected him for a long time, and recently he obtained proof thanks to Xenos' help. Goldrin is shocked because he thought Bonds had destroyed the photograph after receiving the position he wanted, but he was wrong. Now Bernardo wants to begin the game, reminding Goldrin of his own idea that not all lives have the same value. That was why he chose to save Fennel and let the others die. Today he would pay for that. Goldrin tries to justify himself by saying that the other people would have died anyway, but Bernardo counters, saying that Afrid was among the wounded and survived. Bernardo's wife, however, was not as fortunate and died because Goldrin drained her energy. Bernardo says that even if Goldrin can still use the transfer magic, he would need a great amount of energy to neutralize the poison. Fortunately, there are many unconscious people nearby. Goldrin is speechless at first, but soon remembers that Bernardo must have an antidote. He tries to negotiate by promising to reduce Bernardo's sentence if he hands over the antidote. But Bernardo has only more poisoned wine in the bottle, and, without a second thought, takes a drink. Now he is also condemned. Bernardo admits that he created an antidote and proposes one final challenge to Goldrin. He can try to save himself, Fennel, and the others, or save Bernardo, betting that Bernardo might give him the antidote. Goldrin asks if Bernardo thinks he will get away with this, but Bernardo only tells him to decide quickly, because the deaths will begin soon. With no escape, Goldrin agrees to enter Bernardo's game and thinks about what to do. Naturally, he decides to save his own life first, then Fennel's. Since he does not know whether Bernardo truly has an antidote, he does not want to take risks. Goldrin starts draining the vital force of everyone there. It was exactly what Bernardo expected. But he is still disappointed that Goldrin chose to sacrifice everyone. Goldrin's poison was the weakest, so he had more vitality left. And, if he wanted, he could have saved everyone. Goldrin pauses for a moment and shouts that of course he will sacrifice the others to save himself, because his life is worth more than all of theirs. After all, he is about to become director, and they must die for him. At that moment, Bernardo spits blood, surprised, since the poison was not supposed to cause that. And while he tries to understand what happened, Zenos and the others enter and are horrified to see the scene. Yuman asks why he did that, and as her uncle, Bernardo decides to explain. He tells how he met his fiancée 13 years earlier. The two were young healers, and her dream was to save many lives. Bernardo wanted to help her achieve that. One day, he learned that she had become a victim of an explosion and died, leaving him devastated. At first, Bernardo believed it had been an accident. He promised to honor her memory by saving other people. But after Afrid attended a dinner at Goldrin's house, he told Bernardo that Goldrin caused the death of his fiancée. After that, Afrid disappeared, and Bernardo no longer knew if it was true. Without proof, he asked Zenos for help to take revenge. Crescent understands Bernardo's pain and agrees that Goldrin is worthless. But poisoning innocent people just to take revenge on him is completely wrong. Zenos agrees with Crescent and says he will make sure no one loses their life today. Zenos positions himself in the middle of the room so he can reach everyone. But Bernardo does not understand why Zenos would go to such lengths, since he himself has nothing to gain from this. Even if that is true, if Zenos left things as they were, Bernardo would end up becoming a murderer, and that would make Yuman very sad. He was truly grateful for the farewell party she made for him, and he had not even repaid the gesture, so he feels this is the least he can do. However, despite Zenos' abilities, Bernardo thinks it is difficult for him to save everyone, especially because he does not even know which poison was used. And even if Bernardo explained, there would not be enough time for Zenos to study the composition of the poison. So Zenos decides to act on instinct. He raises his hands and activates a healing spell. But Bernardo warns him that this basic spell is useless in this situation, because it only treats injuries and cannot remove poison from the body. But Zenos had already predicted that. He realized he would not be able to eliminate the poison directly, so he decided to keep using healing magic to sustain everyone until the poison left their bodies naturally. Crescent and Yuman offer to help, and Zenos asks them to focus on casting healing magic on the most weakened. Meanwhile, Bernardo cannot believe how Zenos is managing to maintain that level of power for so long. Seeing everyone dedicate themselves so much to saving the others, Bernardo begins to question whether what he did was truly right. His wife's dream was to save as many people as possible, but now the man responsible for her death is about to become the new head of the hospital, and he is someone who believes that only the rich and influential deserve to be saved. Bernardo could not allow someone like Goldrin to reach that position of power in the hospital. If that happened, only the wealthy would have access to advanced treatment, while the rest would be left without care. But if all lives are valuable, Bernardo understands that he cannot take lives merely out of a thirst for revenge. He kneels and thanks Zenos for having saved everyone there, but Zenos says he was simply fulfilling his duty. Even so, he warns that he will send the bill to Bernardo, because the effort was enormous. Zenos may have saved the others, but he does not have any sympathy for Goldrin, so he left him behind. Goldrin screams in pain and orders Xenos to heal him immediately. But Xenos reminds him that he is no longer part of Goldrin's faction, so he has no reason to obey. Goldrin then turns to the students and demands that they help him. But they had heard everything, and now know that he was willing to sacrifice them, so no one wants to help. Xenos tells Goldrin that his own students have turned their backs on him. Even so, Xenos is willing to help, but only if Goldrin agrees to pay for the healing. And since Xenos is already at his limit, he will charge an additional fee. Xenos says that if Goldrin does not want to pay, he will not insist and is already leaving. But Goldrin notices that Xenos truly might let him die and ends up accepting the price. However, being healed is no longer his biggest problem, because Fennel heard everything about how Goldrin was responsible for the explosion 13 years ago, and he is furious. The next day, Bernardo is taken to be interrogated in prison, and Xenos and Yuman obtain authorization to visit him. Yuman is happy to see that Bernardo is returning to who he was before. Bernardo is also pleased with the visit, but surprised by how quickly they received permission. Xenos comments that he has a contact in the Imperial Guard, specifically the vice captain. Xenos thanks her for the help, but she says it is nothing compared to what Xenos has already done for her. Xenos went there because he wanted to clear up a doubt with Bernardo. After thinking about what happened the day before, he and Yuman feel that Bernardo did not want to hurt anyone. Bernardo admits that it is true. His initial idea was to use a fake poison to deceive Goldrin and force him to confess his crimes from the past. He had prepared a substance that would only paralyze, without causing harm, to make everything more convincing. But someone replaced it with the real poison, and then everything spiraled out of control. Bernardo suspects it was Afreed, who was probably at the party at the time. Yuman thinks this is great, because if they prove that Afreed was the one who made the switch, they can clear Bernardo's name. But Bernardo interrupts and says that even so, he was wrong. He realized the poison was real and, in his desperation, no longer cared if everyone died, and that is something he cannot forgive himself for. Krishna says that nobody needs to worry about Bernardo, because in the end everyone was saved thanks to Xenos' effort, and they were left with no after effects. She says that she can use her position to have the charges against Bernardo annulled. Xenos does not think this is the most correct approach, but he knows they will need all the help they can get and agrees to let Krishna handle the situation. Before Xenos leaves, Bernardo says one more thing. He finds it hard to believe that the real Afreed could have survived the accident 13 years ago, especially after Goldrin drained his life force. Because of this, Bernardo believes that the current Afreed is an imposter, and since it was Xenos who ruined this imposter's plan to make Bernardo attack a group of nobles, Bernardo fears that the next target will be Xenos. In another part of the kingdom, we discover that the one pulling the strings behind everything was the guide, who now controls Afreed's body, and he is frustrated because the plan failed.